"Ah, madam," said D'Artagnan, entering by the door which a young woman opened for him, "allow me to tell you that you have a bad sort of a husband." "You have, then, overheard our conversation?" asked Enemy Bonacieux, eagerly, and looking at D'Artagnan with disquiet. "The whole. But how, my God?" "By a mode of proceeding known to myself, and by which I likewise overheard the more animated conversation which he had with the cardinal's police." "And what did you understand by what was said?" "A thousand things. In the first place, that, unfortunately, your husband is a simpleton and a fool. In the next place, you are in trouble, of which I am very glad, as it gives me an opportunity of placing myself at your service, and God knows I am ready to throw myself into the fire for you. Finally, that the Queen wants a brave, intelligent, devoted man to make a journey to London for her. I have at least 2 of the 3 qualities you stand in need of, and here I am." Enemy Bonacieux made no reply, but her heart beat with joy and secret hope shone in her eyes. "And what guarantee will you give me," asked she, "if I consent to confide this message to you?" "My love for you." "Speak, command, what is to be done?" My God," murmured the young woman. "Ought I to confide such a secret to you, monsieur? You are almost a boy. I see that you require someone to answer for me. I admit that would reassure me greatly. Do you know Athos?" "No." "Porthos?" "No." "Aramis?" "No." "Who are these gentlemen?" "3 of the king's musketeers. Do you know Monsieur de Treville, their captain?" "Oh, yes, him. I know him, not personally, but from having heard the Queen speak of him more than once as a brave and loyal gentleman." "You do not fear lest he should betray you to the cardinal?" "Oh, no, certainly not." "Well, reveal your secret to him, and ask him whether, however important, however valuable, however terrible it may be, you may not confide it to me. But this secret is not mine, and I cannot reveal it in this manner." "You are about to confide it to Monsieur Bonacieux," said D'Artagnan, with chagrin, "as one confides a letter to the hollow of a tree, to the wing of a pigeon, to the collar of a dog. And yet, you see plainly that I love you." "You say so." "I am an honorable man." "You say so." "I am a gallant fellow." "I believe it." "I am brave." "Oh, I am sure of that." "Then put me to the proof." Enemy Bonacieux looked at the young man, restrained for a minute by a last hesitation, but there was such an ardor in his eyes, such persuasion in his voice, that she felt herself constrained to confide in him. Besides, she found herself in circumstances where everything must be risked for the sake of everything. The Queen might be as much injured by too much reticence as by too much confidence, and, let us admit it, the involuntary sentiment which she felt for a young protector decided her to speak. "Listen," said she, "I yield to your protestations, I yield to your assurances, but I swear to you, before God who hears us, that if you betray me, and my enemies pardon me, I will kill myself while accusing you of my death." "And I swear to you before God, madam," said D'Artagnan, "that if I am taken while accomplishing the orders you give me, I will die sooner than do anything that may compromise anyone." Then the young woman confided in him the terrible secret of which chance had already communicated to him apart in front of the Samaritan. This was their mutual declaration of love. D'Artagnan was radiant with joy and pride. This secret which he possessed, this woman whom he loved. Confidence and love made him a giant. "I go," said he, "I go at once." "How? You will go," said Enemy Bonacieux. "And your regiment, your captain?" "By my soul, you had made me forget all that, dear Constance. Yes, you are right. A furlough is needful." "Still another obstacle," murmured Enemy Bonacieux, sorrowfully. "As to that," cried D'Artagnan, after a moment of reflection, "I shall surmount it, be assured." "How so?" "I will go this very evening to Treville, whom I will request to ask this favor for me of his brother-in-law, Monsieur de Cesset. But another thing." "What?" asked D'Artagnan, seeing that Mme Bonacieux hesitated to continue. You have, perhaps, no money. Perhaps is too much, said D'Artagnan, smiling. Then, replied Mme Bonacieux, opening a cupboard and taking from it the very bag which a half-hour before her husband had caressed so affectionately. Take this bag. The cardinals, cried D'Artagnan, breaking into a loud laugh, he having heard, as may be remembered, thanks to the broken boards, every syllable of the conversation between the mercer and his wife. The cardinals, replied Mme Bonacieux. You see it makes a very respectable appearance. Had you, cried D'Artagnan, it will be a double amusing affair to save the queen with the cardinal's money. You are an amiable and charming young man, said Mme Bonacieux. Be assured you will not find Her Majesty ungrateful. Silence, said Mme Bonacieux, starting. What? Someone is talking in the street. It is the voice of... D'Artagnan ran to the door and pushed the bolt. He shall not come in before I am gone, said he, and when I am gone, you can open to him. But I ought to be gone, too, and the disappearance of his money. How am I to justify it if I am here? You are right. We must go out. Go out? How? He will see us if we go out. Then you must come up into my room. Oh, said Mme Bonacieux, you speak that in a tone that frightens me. Mme Bonacieux pronounced these words with tears in her eyes. D'Artagnan saw those tears, and much disturbed, softened, he threw himself at her feet. With me you will be as safe as in a temple. I give you my word of a gentleman. Let us go, said she. I place full confidence in you, my friend. D'Artagnan drew back the bolt with precaution, and both, light as shadows, glided through the interior door into the passage, ascended the stairs as quietly as possible, and entered D'Artagnan's chambers. Once there, for greater security, the young man barricaded the door. They both approached the window, and through a slit in the shutter they saw Bonacieux, talking with a man in a cloak. At sight of this man, D'Artagnan started, and half drawing his sword, sprang toward the door. It was the man of Mons. What are you going to do? Cried Mme Bonacieux. You will ruin us all. But I have sworn to kill that man, said D'Artagnan. Your life is devoted from this moment, and does not belong to you. In the name of the Queen, I forbid you to throw yourself into any peril which is foreign to that of your journey. And do you command nothing in your own name? In my name, said Mme Bonacieux, with great emotion. In my name I beg you. But listen, they appear to be speaking of me. D'Artagnan drew near the window, and lent his ear. M. Bonacieux had opened his door, and seeing the apartment, had returned to the man in the cloak, whom he had left alone for an instant. She is gone, said he. She must have returned to the Louvre. You are sure, replied the stranger, that she did not suspect the intentions with which you went out? No, replied Bonacieux, with a self-sufficient air. She is too superficial a woman. Is the young guardsman at home? I do not think he is. As you see, his shutter is closed, and you can see no light shine through the chinks of the shutters. All the same, it is well to be certain. How so? By knocking at his door. Go. I will ask his servant. Bonacieux re-entered the house, passed through the same door that had afforded a passage for the two fugitives, went up to D'Artagnan's door, and knocked. No one answered. Porthos, in order to make a greater display, had that evening borrowed planchette. As to D'Artagnan, he took care not to give the least sign of existence. The moment the hand of Bonacieux sounded on the door, the two young people felt their hearts bound within them. There is nobody within, said Bonacieux. Ah, my God, whispered Mme Bonacieux, we shall hear no more. On the contrary, said D'Artagnan, we shall hear better. D'Artagnan raised the 3 or 4 boards which made his chamber another ear of Dionysus, spread a carpet on the floor, went upon his knees, and made a sign to Mme Bonacieux to stoop, as he did toward the opening. You are sure there is nobody there, said the stranger. I will answer for it, said Bonacieux. And you think that your wife... has returned to the Louvre, without speaking to anyone but yourself. I am sure of it. That is an important point. Do you understand? Then the news I brought you is of value. The greatest, my dear Bonacieux. I don't conceal this from you. Then the cardinal will be pleased with me. I have no doubt of it. The great cardinal. Are you sure, in a conversation with you, that your wife mentioned no names? I think not. She did not name Madame de Chevreuse, the Duke of Buckingham, or Madame de Vernet. No, she only told me she wished to send me to London to serve the interests of an illustrious personage. The traitor, murmured Mime Bonacieux. Silence, said D'Artagnan, taking her hand, which, without thinking of it, she abandoned to him. Never mind, continued the man in the cloak. You were a fool not to have pretended to accept the mission. You would then be in present possession of the letter. The state, which is now threatened, would be safe, and you, and I. Well, the cardinal would have given you letters of nobility. Did he tell you so? Yes, I know that he meant to afford you that agreeable surprise. Be satisfied, replied Bonacieux. My wife adores me, and there is yet time. The ninny, murmured Mime Bonacieux. Silence, said D'Artagnan, pressing her hand more closely. How is there still time? Asked the man in the cloak. I go to the Louvre. I ask for Mime Bonacieux. I say that I have reflected. I renew the affair. I obtain the letter, and I run directly to the cardinal. The stranger went out. Infamous, said Mime Bonacieux, addressing this epithet to her husband. Silence, said D'Artagnan, pressing her hand still more warmly. A terrible howling interrupted these reflections of D'Artagnan and Mime Bonacieux. It was her husband who had discovered the disappearance of the money bag and was crying thieves. Oh, my God, cried Mime Bonacieux. He will rouse the whole quarter. Bonacieux called a long time, but as such cries, on account of their frequency, brought nobody in the Rue des Faciers, and as lately the mercer's house had bad name, finding that nobody came, he went out continuing to call, his voice being heard fainter and fainter as he went in the direction of the Rue du Bac. To her and to you, cried D'Artagnan, be satisfied, beautiful Constance. I shall become worthy of her gratitude, but shall I likewise return worthy of your love? Mime Bonacieux followed him with her eyes. With that long, fond look with which he had turned the angle of the street, she fell on her knees, and clasping her hands, "Oh, my God," cried she, "protect the queen, protect me." The heart of the young man overflowed with joy. An opportunity presented itself to him in which there would be at the same time glory to be acquired and money to be gained. And as a far higher encouragement, it brought him into close intimacy with a woman he adored. This chance did, then, for him at once more than he would have dared to ask of Providence. M. de Treville was in his saloon with his habitual court of gentlemen. D'Artagnan, who was known as a familiar of the house, went straight to his office, and sent word that he wished to see him on something of importance. All the way along D'Artagnan had been consulting with himself whether he should place confidence in M. de Treville, or whether he should only ask him to give him carte blanche for some secret affair. But M. de Treville had always been so thoroughly his friend, had always been so devoted to the king and queen, and hated the cardinal so cordially, that the young man resolved to tell him everything. "Did you ask for me, my good friend?" said M. de Treville. "Yes, monsieur," said D'Artagnan, lowering his voice, "and you will pardon me, I hope, for having disturbed you when you know the importance of my business." "Speak, then I am all attention." "It concerns nothing less," said D'Artagnan, "than the honor, perhaps the life of the queen." "What did you say?" asked M. de Treville, glancing round to see if they were surely alone, and then fixing his questioning look upon D'Artagnan. "I say, monsieur, that chance has rendered me master of a secret, which you will guard, I hope, young man, as your life, but which I must impart to you, monsieur, for you alone can assist me in the mission I have just received from Her Majesty. Is this secret your own?" No, monsieur, it is Her Majesty's. Are you authorized by Her Majesty to communicate it to me? No, monsieur, for, on the contrary, I am desired to preserve the profoundest mystery. Why, then, are you about to betray it to me? Because, as I said, without you I can do nothing, and I am afraid you will refuse me the favor I come to ask if you do not know to what end I ask it. Keep your secret, young man, and tell me what you wish. I wish you to obtain from me, from Monsieur de Cesset, leave of absence for 15 days. When, this very night, you leave Paris, I am going on a mission. May you tell me whither? To London. Has anyone an interest in preventing your arrival there? The Cardinal, I believe, would give the world to prevent my success. And you are going alone. I am going alone. In that case, you will not get beyond Bondy. I tell you so, by the faith of de Treville. How so? You will be assassinated, and I shall die in the performance of my duty. But your mission will not be accomplished. That is true, replied D'Artagnan. Believe me, continued Treville, in enterprises of this kind, in order that one may arrive, for must set out. Ah, you are right, monsieur, said D'Artagnan, but you know Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, and you know if I can dispose of them, without confiding to them the secret which I am not willing to know. We are sworn, once for all, to implicit confidence and devotedness against all proof. Besides, you can tell them that you have full confidence in me, and they will not be more incredulous than you. I can send to each of them leave of absence for 15 days, that is all, to Athos, whose wound still makes him suffer, to go to the waters of Forges, to Porthos and Aramis to accompany their friend, whom they are not willing to abandon in such a painful condition. Sending their leave of absence will be proof enough that I authorize their journey. Thanks, monsieur. You are 100 times too good. Begone, then, find them instantly, and let all be done tonight. Ha! But first write your request to de Cesset. Perhaps you had a spy at your heels, and your visit, if it should ever be known to the cardinal, will thus seem legitimate. D'Artagnan drew up his request, and M. de Treville, on receiving it, assured him that by 2 o'clock in the morning the 4 leaves of absence should be at the respective domiciles of the travelers. Have the goodness to send mine to Athos's residence. I should dread some disagreeable encounter if I were to go home. Be easy. Adieu, and a prosperous voyage. Apropos, said M. de Treville, calling him back. D'Artagnan returned. Have you any money? D'Artagnan tapped the bag he had in his pocket. Enough? Asked M. de Treville. 300 pistoles. His first visit was to Aramis, at whose residence he had not been since the famous evening on which he had followed Enemy Bonacieux. Still further, he had seldom seen the young musketeer, but every time he had seen him, he had remarked a deep sadness imprinted on his countenance. This evening, especially, Aramis was melancholy and thoughtful. D'Artagnan asked some questions about this prolonged melancholy. Aramis pleaded as his excuse a commentary upon the 18th chapter of St. Augustine, which he was forced to write in Latin for the following week, and which preoccupied him a good deal. After the 2 friends had been chatting a few moments, a servant from M. de Treville entered, bringing a sealed packet. "What is that?" asked Aramis. "The leave of absence monsieur has asked for," replied the lackey. "For me, I have asked for no leave of absence." "Hold your tongue and take it," said D'Artagnan. "And you, my friend, there's a dim epistola for your trouble. You will tell Monsieur de Treville that Monsieur Aramis is very much obliged to him. Go." The lackey bowed to the ground and departed. "What does all this mean?" asked Aramis. "Pack up all you want for a journey of a fortnight and follow me." "But I cannot leave Paris just now without knowing." Aramis stopped. "What has become of her?" "I suppose you mean," continued D'Artagnan. "Become of whom?" replied Aramis. "The woman who was here, the woman with the embroidered handkerchief." "Who told you there was a woman here?" replied Aramis, becoming as pale as death. I saw her, and you know who she is. I believe I can guess, at least. Listen, said Aramis, since you appear to know so many things, can you tell me what has become of that woman? I presume that she has returned to Tours. To Tours? Yes, that may be. You evidently know her. But why did she return to Tours without telling me anything? Because she was in fear of being arrested. Why has she not written to me, then? Because she was afraid of compromising you. D'Artagnan, you restore me to life, cried Aramis. I fancied myself despised, betrayed. I was so delighted to see her again. I could not have believed she would risk her liberty for me, and yet for what other cause could she have returned to Paris? For the cause which today takes us to England. And what is this cause? Demanded Aramis. Oh, you'll know it some day, Aramis, but at present I must imitate the discretion of the doctor's niece. Aramis smiled, as he remembered the tale he had told his friends on a certain evening. Well, then, since she has left Paris, and you are sure of it, D'Artagnan, nothing prevents me, and I am ready to follow you. You say we are going to see Athos now, and if you will come thither, I beg you to make haste, for we have lost much time already. Apropos, inform Bazin. Will Bazin go with us? Asked Aramis. Perhaps so. At all events, it is best that he should follow us to Athos's. Aramis called Bazin, and, after having ordered him to join them at Athos's residence, said, "Let us go then," at the same time taking his cloak, sword, and 3 pistols, opening uselessly 2 or 3 drawers to see if he could not find stray coin. When well assured this search was superfluous, he followed D'Artagnan, wondering to himself how this young guardsman should know so well who the lady was to whom he had given hospitality, and that he should know better than himself what had become of her. Only as they went out, Aramis placed his hand upon the arm of D'Artagnan, and looking at him earnestly, "You have not spoken of this lady," said he, "to nobody in the world, not even to Athos or Porthos. I have not breathed a syllable to them." Good enough. Tranquil on this important point, Aramis continued his way with D'Artagnan, and both soon arrived at Athos's dwelling. They found him holding his leave of absence in one hand, and M. de Treville's note in the other. "Can you explain to me what signified this leave of absence and this letter, which I have just received?" said the astonished Athos. "My dear Athos, I wish, as your health absolutely requires it, that you should rest for a fortnight. Go, then, and take the waters of Forges, or any that may be more agreeable to you, and recuperate yourself as quickly as possible. Yours affectionate, de Treville." Well, this leave of absence and that letter mean that you must follow me, Athos, to the waters of Forges, there or elsewhere, in the king's service. "Since," said D'Artagnan, "they have friends who ask it for them." Ah, said Porthos, "it appears there's something fresh here." "Yes, we are going," said Aramis. "To what country?" demanded Porthos. "To London, gentlemen," said D'Artagnan. "To London," cried Porthos. "And what the devil are we going to do in London?" "That is what I am not at liberty to tell you. Gentlemen, you must trust to me." "But in order to go to London," added Porthos, "money is needed, and I have none." "Nor I," said Aramis. "Nor I," said Athos. "I have," replied D'Artagnan, pulling out his treasure from his pocket and placing it on the table. "They are in this bag 300 pistoles. Let each take 75. That is enough to take us to London and back. Besides, make yourselves easy. We shall not all arrive at London." "Why so?" "Because, in all probability, some one of us will be left on the road." "Is this, then, a campaign upon which we are now entering?" "One of a most dangerous kind. I give you notice." But if we do risk being killed," said Porthos, "at least I should like to know what for." "You would be all the wiser," said Athos. "And yet," said Aramis, "I am somewhat of Porthos's opinion." Is the king accustomed to give you such reasons? No. He says to you jauntily, Gentlemen, there is fighting going on in Gascony or in Flanders. Go and fight, and you go there. Why? You need give yourselves no more uneasiness about this. D'Artagnan is right, said Athos. Here are our 3 leaves of absence which came from Monsieur de Treville, and here are 300 pistols which came from I don't know where. So let us go and get killed where we are told to go. Is life worth the trouble of so many questions? D'Artagnan, I am ready to follow you. And I also, said Porthos. And I also, said Aramis. And, indeed, I am not sorry to quit Paris. I had need of distraction. Well, you will have distractions enough, gentlemen, be assured, said D'Artagnan. And now, when are we to go? Asked Athos. Immediately, replied D'Artagnan. We have not a minute to lose. Hello, Grimaud, Planchet, Mouston, Bazin, cried the 4 young men, calling their lackeys. Clean my boots, and fetch the horses from the hotel. Each musketeer was accustomed to leave at the general hotel, as at a barrack, his own horse and that of his lackey. Planchet, Grimaud, Mousqueton, and Bazin set off at full speed. Now let us lay down the plan of campaign, said Porthos. Where do we go first? To Calais, said D'Artagnan. That is the most direct line to London. Well, said Porthos, this is my advice. Speak. Gentlemen, said Athos, my opinion is that it is not proper to allow lackeys to have anything to do in such an affair. A secret may, by chance, be betrayed by gentlemen, but it is almost always so by lackeys. Porthos's plan appears to me to be impracticable, said D'Artagnan, inasmuch as I myself ignorant of what instructions I can give you. I am the bearer of a letter. That is all. I have not, and I cannot make 3 copies of that letter, because it is sealed. We must, then, as it appears to me, travel in company. This letter is here, in this pocket. And he pointed to the pocket which contained the letter. If I should be killed, one of you must take it, and continue the route. If he be killed, it will be another's turn, and so on, provided a single one arrives. That is all that is required. Bravo, D'Artagnan, your opinion is mine, cried Athos. Besides, we must be consistent. I am going to take the warders. You will accompany me. Instead of taking the warders of forges, I go and take the warders. I am free to do so. If anyone wishes to stop us, I will show Monsieur de Treville's letter, and you will show your leaves of absence. If we are attacked, we will defend ourselves. If we are tried, we will stoutly maintain that we were only anxious to dip ourselves a certain number of times in the sea. They would have an easy bargain of 4 isolated men, whereas 4 men together make a troop. We will arm our 4 lackeys with pistols and musketoons. If they send an army out against us, we will give battle, and the survivor, as D'Artagnan says, will carry the letter. Well said, cried Aramis. You don't often speak, Athos, but when you do speak, it is like St. John of the Golden Mouth. I agree to Athos's plan. And you, Porthos? I agree to it, too, said Porthos, if D'Artagnan approves of it. D'Artagnan, being the bearer of the letter, is naturally the head of the enterprise. Let him decide, and we will execute. Well, said D'Artagnan, I decide that we should adopt Athos's plan, and that we set off in half an hour. Agreed, shouted the 3 musketeers in chorus. Each one, stretching out his hand to the bag, took his 75 pistols, and made his preparations to set out at the time appointed. Chapter 20. The Journey. At 2 o'clock in the morning, our 4 adventurers left Paris by the Barrière Street Denis. As long as it was dark, they remained silent. In spite of themselves, they submitted to the influence of the obscurity and apprehended ambushes on every side. With the first rays of day, their tongues were loosened. With the sun, gaiety revived. It was like the eve of a battle. The heart beat, the eyes laughed, and they felt that the life they were perhaps going to lose was, after all, a good thing. Besides, the appearance of the caravan was formidable. The black horses of the musketeers, their martial carriage, With a regimental step of these noble companions of the soldier would have betrayed the most strict incognito. The lackeys followed, armed to the teeth. All went well till they arrived at Chantilly, which they reached about 8 o'clock in the morning. They needed breakfast, and alighted at the door of an auberge, recommended by a sign representing Saint Martin giving half his cloak to a poor man. They ordered the lackeys not to unsaddle the horses, and to hold themselves in readiness to set off again immediately. They entered the common hall, and placed themselves at table. A gentleman, who had just arrived by the route of Dammartin, was seated at the same table, and was breakfasting. He opened the conversation about rain and fine weather. The travellers replied. He drank to their good health, and the travellers returned his politeness. But at the moment Mouston came to announce that the horses were ready, and they were rising from table, the stranger proposed to Porthos to drink the health of the cardinal. Porthos replied that he asked no better if the stranger, in his turn, would drink the health of the king. The stranger cried that he acknowledged no other king but his eminence. Porthos called him drunk, and the stranger drew his sword. "You have committed a piece of folly," said Athos, "but it can't be helped. There is no drawing back. Kill the fellow, and rejoin us as soon as you can." All three remounted their horses, and set out at a good pace, while Porthos was promising his adversary to perforate him with all the thrusts known in the fencing schools. "There goes one," cried Athos, at the end of 500 paces. "But why did that man attack Porthos rather than any other one of us?" asked Aramis. "Because, as Porthos was talking louder than the rest of us, he took him for the chief," said D'Artagnan. "I always said that this cadet from Gascony was a well of wisdom," murmured Athos, and the travellers continued their route. At Beauvais they stopped 2 hours, as well to breathe their horses a little as to wait for Porthos. At the end of 2 hours, as Porthos did not come, not any news of him, they resumed their journey. At a league from Beauvais, where the road was confined between two high banks, they fell in with 8 or 10 men who, taking advantage of the road being unpaved in this spot, appeared to be employed in digging holes and filling up the ruts with mud. Aramis, not liking to soil his boots with this artificial mortar, apostrophized them rather sharply. Athos wished to restrain him, but it was too late. The laborious began to jeer the travellers, and by their insolence disturbed the equanimity even of the cool Athos, who urged on his horse against one of them. Then each of these men retreated as far as the ditch, from which each took a concealed musket. The result was that our 7 travellers were outnumbered in weapons. Aramis received a ball which passed through his shoulder, and Mouston another ball which lodged in the fleshy part which prolongs the lower portion of the loins. Therefore Mouston alone fell from his horse, not because he was severely wounded, but not being able to see the wound, he judged it to be more serious than it really was. "It was an ambuscade," shouted D'Artagnan. "Don't waste a charge. Forward!" Aramis, wounded as he was, seized the meneur of his horse, which carried him on with the others. Mouston's horse rejoined them, and galloped by the side of his companions. "That will serve us for a relay," said Athos. "I would rather have had a hat," said D'Artagnan. "Mine was carried away by a ball. By my faith, it is very fortunate that the letter was not in it." "They'll kill poor Porthos when he comes up," said Aramis. They continued at their best speed for 2 hours, although the horses were so fatigued that it was to be feared they would soon refuse service. The travellers had chosen crossroads in the hope that they might meet with less interruption, but at Crèvecoeur, Aramis declared he could proceed no farther. In fact, it required all the courage which he concealed beneath his elegant form and polished manners to bear him so far. He grew more pale every minute, and they were obliged to support him on his horse. They lifted him off at the door of a cabaret, left Bazin with him, who, besides, in a skirmish was more embarrassing than useful, and set forward again in the hope of sleeping at Amiens. "Morbleu," said Athos, as soon as they were again in motion, "reduced to 2 masters in Grimaud and Planchet. Morbleu, I won't be their dupe. I will answer for it. I will neither open my mouth nor draw my sword between this and Calais. I swear by—" "Don't waste time in swearing," said D'Artagnan. "Let us gallop, if our horses will consent." And the travellers bared their rowels in their horses' flanks, who thus vigorously stimulated recovered their energies. They arrived at Amiens at midnight, and alighted at the auberge of the Golden Lily. The host had the appearance of as honest a man as any on earth. He received the travelers with his candlestick in one hand and his cotton nightcap in the other. He wished to lodge the two travelers each in a charming chamber, but unfortunately these charming chambers were at the opposite extremities of the hotel. D'Artagnan and Athos refused them. The host replied that he had no other worthy of their excellencies, but the travelers declared they would sleep in the common chamber, each on a mattress which might be thrown upon the ground. The host insisted, but the travelers were firm, and he was obliged to do as they wished. They had just prepared their beds and barricaded their door within, when someone knocked at the yard shutter. They demanded who was there, and recognizing the voices of their lackeys, opened the shutter. It was indeed Planchet and Grimaud. "Grimaud can take care of the horses," said Planchet. "If you are willing, gentlemen, I will sleep across your doorway, and you will then be certain that nobody can reach you." "And on what will you sleep?" said D'Artagnan. "Here is my bed," replied Planchet, producing a bundle of straw. "Come, then," said D'Artagnan, "you are right. Mine host's face does not please me at all. It is too gracious." "Nor me either," said Athos. Planchet mounted by the window and installed himself across the doorway, while Grimaud went and shut himself up in the stable, undertaking that by 5 o'clock in the morning he and the 4 horses should be ready. At 4 o'clock in the morning they heard a terrible riot in the stables. Grimaud had tried to waken the stable boys, and the stable boys had beaten him. When they opened the window, they saw the poor lad lying senseless, with his head split by a blow with a pitchfork. Planchet went down into the yard and wished to saddle the horses, but the horses were all used up. Mouston's horse, which had traveled for 5 or 6 hours without a rider the day before, might have been able to pursue the journey, but by an inconceivable error the veterinary surgeon, who had been sent for, as it appeared, to bleed one of the host's horses, had bled Mouston's. Athos went down to pay the reckoning, while D'Artagnan and Planchet stood at the street door. The host was in a lower and back room, to which Athos was requested to go. Athos entered without the least mistrust, and took out 2 pistoles to pay the bill. The host was alone, seated before his desk, one of the drawers of which was partly open. He took the money which Athos offered to him, and after turning and turning it over and over in his hands, suddenly cried out that it was bad, and that he would have him and his companions arrested as forgers. "You blackguard," cried Athos, going toward him, "I'll cut your ears off." At the same instant, 4 men, armed to the teeth, entered by side doors and rushed upon Athos. D'Artagnan and Planchet did not require twice bidding. They unfastened the 2 horses that were waiting at the door, leaped upon them, buried their spurs in their sides, and set off at full gallop. "Do you know what has become of Athos?" asked D'Artagnan of Planchet, as they galloped on. "Aye, monsieur," said Planchet. "I saw one fall at each of his 2 shots, and he appeared to me, through the glass door, to be fighting with his sword with the others." At 100 paces from the gates of Calais, D'Artagnan's horse gave out, and could not by any means be made to get up again, the blood flowing from his eyes and his nose. There still remained Planchet's horse, but he stopped short and could not be made to move a step. Fortunately, as we have said, they were within 100 paces of the city. They left their 2 nags upon the high road and ran toward the quay. Planchet called his master's attention to a gentleman who had just arrived with his lackey, and only preceded them by about 50 paces. They made all speed to come up to this gentleman, who appeared to be in great haste. His boots were covered with dust, and he inquired if he could not instantly cross over to England. "Nothing would be more easy," said the captain of a vessel ready to set sail, "but this morning came an order to let no one leave without express permission from a cardinal." "I have that permission," said the gentleman, drawing the paper from his pocket. "Here it is." "Have it examined by the governor of the port," said the shipmaster, "and give me the preference." "At his country house, and that is situated." "Very well," said the gentleman, and, with his lackey, he took the road to the governor's country house. D'Artagnan and Planchet followed the gentleman at a distance of 500 paces. Once outside the city, D'Artagnan overtook the gentleman as he was entering a little wood. "Monsieur, you appear to be in great haste." "No one can be more so, monsieur." "I am sorry for that," said D'Artagnan, "for as I am in great haste likewise, I wish to beg you to render me a service." "What?" "To let me sail first." "That's impossible," said the gentleman. "I have traveled 60 leagues in 40 hours, and by tomorrow at midday I must be in London. I have performed that same distance in 40 hours, and by 10 o'clock in the morning I must be in London. Very sorry, monsieur, but I was here first, and will not sail second. I am sorry, too, monsieur, but I arrived second, and must sail first." "The king's service," said the gentleman. "My own service," said D'Artagnan. "But this is a needless quarrel you seek with me, as it seems to me. Parbleu, what do you desire it to be? What do you want? Would you like to know?" "Certainly." "Well, then, I wish that order of which you are bearer, seeing that I have not one of my own and must have one." "You jest, I presume." "I never jest." "Let me pass." "You shall not pass." "My brave young man, I will blow out your brains. Hola, Lubin, my pistols." Planchet called out D'Artagnan, "Take care of the lackey. I will manage the master." Planchet, emboldened by the first exploit, sprang upon Lubin, and being strong and vigorous, he soon got him on the broad of his back and placed his knee upon his breast. "Go on with your fay, monsieur," cried Planchet. "I have finished mine." Seeing this, the gentleman drew his sword and sprang upon D'Artagnan, but he had too strong an adversary. In 3 seconds D'Artagnan had wounded him 3 times, exclaiming at each thrust, "One for Athos, one for Porthos, and one for Aramis." At the third hit the gentleman fell like a log. D'Artagnan believed him to be dead, or at least insensible, and went toward him for the purpose of taking the order. But the moment he extended his hand to search for it, the wounded man, who had not dropped his sword, plunged the point into D'Artagnan's breast, crying, "One for you." "And one for me, the best for last," cried D'Artagnan, furious, nailing him to the earth with a fall thrust through his body. This time the gentleman closed his eyes and fainted. D'Artagnan searched his pockets, and took from one of them the order for the passage. It was in the name of Comte de Wardes. Then, casting a glance on the handsome young man, who was scarcely 25 years of age, and whom he was leaving in his gore, deprived of sense and perhaps dead, he gave a sigh for that unaccountable destiny which leads men to destroy each other for the interest of people who are strangers to them and who often do not even know that they exist. But he was soon aroused from these reflections by Lubin, who uttered loud cries and screamed for help with all his might. In fact, tightly held as he was, Lubin endeavored still to cry out. "Stay," said D'Artagnan, and taking out his handkerchief, he gagged him. "Now," said Planchet, "let us bind him to a tree." This being properly done, they drew the Comte de Wardes close to his servant, and as night was approaching, and as the wounded man and the bound man were at some little distance within the wood, it was evident they were likely to remain there till the next day. "And now," said D'Artagnan to the governors. "But you are wounded, it seems," said Planchet. And they both set forward as fast as they could toward the country house of the worthy functionary. The Comte de Wardes was announced, and D'Artagnan was introduced. "You have an order signed by the cardinal," said the governor. "Yes, monsieur," replied D'Artagnan. "Here it is." Ah, it is quite regular and explicit," said the governor. "Most likely," said D'Artagnan. "I am one of his most faithful servants. It appears that His Eminence is anxious to prevent someone from crossing to England." "Yes, a certain D'Artagnan, a Bearnese gentleman who left Paris in company with 3 of his friends, with the intention of going to London." "Do you know him personally?" asked the governor. "Whom?" "This D'Artagnan." "Perfectly well." "Describe him to me, then." "Nothing more easy." And D'Artagnan gave, feature for feature, a description of the Comte de Wardes. Is he accompanied? Yes, by a lackey named Lubin. We will keep a sharp lookout for them, and if we lay hands on them, His Eminence may be assured they will be reconducted to Paris under good escort. And by doing so, Monsieur the Governor, said D'Artagnan, you will deserve well the Cardinal. Shall you see him on your return, Monsieur Count? Tell him, I beg you, that I am his humble servant. I will not fail. Delighted with this assurance, the governor countersigned the passport and delivered it to D'Artagnan. D'Artagnan lost no time in useless compliments. He thanked the governor, bowed, and departed. Once outside, he and Planchet set off as fast as they could, and by making a long detour avoided the wood and re-entered the city by another gate. The vessel was quite ready to sail, and the captain was waiting on the wharf. Well, said he, on perceiving D'Artagnan, here is my pass countersigned, said the latter. And that other gentleman? He will not go today, said D'Artagnan, but I'll pay you for us two. In that case, let us go, said the shipmaster. Let us go, repeated D'Artagnan. He leaped with Planchet into the boat, and 5 minutes after they were on board. It was time, for they had scarcely sailed half a league, when D'Artagnan saw a flash and heard a detonation. It was the cannon which announced the closing of the port. He had now leisure to look to his wound. Fortunately, as D'Artagnan had thought, it was not dangerous. The point of the sword had touched a rib, and glanced along the bone. Still further, his shirt had stuck to the wound, and he had lost only a few drops of blood. D'Artagnan was worn out with fatigue. A mattress was laid upon the deck for him. He threw himself upon it and fell asleep. On the morrow, at break of day, they were still 3 or 4 leagues from the coast of England. The breeze had been so light all night, they had made but little progress. At 10 o'clock the vessel cast anchor in the harbour of Dover, and at 10:30 D'Artagnan placed his foot on English land, crying, Here I am at last. D'Artagnan did not know London. He did not know a word of English, but he wrote the name of Buckingham on a piece of paper, and everyone pointed out to him the way to the Duke's hotel. The Duke was at Windsor hunting with the king. D'Artagnan inquired for the confidential valet of the Duke, who, having accompanied him in all his voyages, spoke French perfectly well. He told him that he came from Paris on an affair of life and death, and that he must speak with his master instantly. The confidence with which D'Artagnan spoke convinced Patrick, which was the name of this minister of the minister. He ordered 2 horses to be saddled, and himself went as guide to the young guardsman. As for Planchet, he had been lifted from his horse as stiff as a rush. The poor lad's strength was almost exhausted. D'Artagnan seemed iron. On their arrival at the castle, they learned that Buckingham and the king were hawking in the marshes 2 or 3 leagues away. In 20 minutes they were on the spot named. Patrick soon caught the sound of his master's voice calling his falcon. Whom must I announce to my Lord Duke? Asked Patrick. The young man who one evening sought a quarrel with him on the Pont Neuf, opposite the Samaritaine. A singular introduction. You will find that it is as good as another. Patrick galloped off, reached the Duke, and announced to him in the terms directed that a messenger awaited him. Buckingham at once remembered the circumstance, and suspecting that something was going on in France of which it was necessary he should be informed, he only took the time to inquire where the messenger was, and recognizing from afar the uniform of the guards, he put his horse into a gallop and rode straight up to D'Artagnan. Patrick discreetly kept in the background. No misfortune has happened to the Queen, cried Buckingham, the instant he came up, throwing all his fear and love into the question. I believe not. Nevertheless, I believe she runs some great peril from which your grace alone can extricate her. Take this letter, said D'Artagnan. This letter? From whom comes this letter? From Her Majesty, as I think. From Her Majesty, said Buckingham, becoming so pale that D'Artagnan feared he would faint as he broke the seal. What is this rent? Said he, showing D'Artagnan a place where it had been pierced through. Ah, said D'Artagnan, I did not see that. It was the sword of the Comte de Wardes which made that hole, when he gave me a good thrust in the breast. You are wounded? Asked Buckingham, as he opened the letter. "Oh, nothing but a scratch," said D'Artagnan. "Just heaven, what have I read?" cried the Duke. "Patrick, remain here, or rather join the king, wherever he may be, and tell his majesty that I humbly beg him to excuse me, but an affair of the greatest importance recalls me to London. Come, monsieur, come," and both set off towards the capital at full gallop. Chapter 21. The Countess de Winter. It was then, upon the manifestation of this astonishment, that D'Artagnan related to him the precaution taken, and how, thanks to the devotion of his three friends, whom he had left scattered and bleeding on the road, he had succeeded in coming off with a single sword thrust, which had pierced the queen's letter and for which he had repaid M. de Wardes with such terrible coin. While he was listening to this recital, delivered with the greatest simplicity, the Duke looked from time to time at the young man with astonishment, as if he could not comprehend how so much prudence, courage, and devotedness could be allied with a countenance which indicated not more than 20 years. The horses went like the wind, and in a few minutes they were at the gates of London. D'Artagnan imagined that on arriving in town the Duke would slacken his pace, but it was not so. He kept on his way at the same rate, heedless about upsetting those whom he met on the road. In fact, in crossing the city 2 or 3 accidents of this kind happened, but Buckingham did not even turn his head to see what became of those he had knocked down. D'Artagnan followed him amid cries, which strongly resembled curses. On entering the court of his hotel, Buckingham sprang from his horse, and without thinking what became of the animal, threw the bridle on his neck and sprang toward the vestibule. D'Artagnan did the same, with a little more concern, however, for the noble creatures, whose merits he fully appreciated, but he had the satisfaction of seeing 3 or 4 grooms run from the kitchens and the stables and busy themselves with the steeds. With discretion, D'Artagnan remained behind, but at the moment when Buckingham crossed the threshold, he turned round, and seeing the hesitation of the young man, "Come in," cried he, "and if you have the good fortune to be admitted to Her Majesty's presence, tell her what you have seen." Encouraged by this invitation, D'Artagnan followed the Duke, who closed the door after them. The two found themselves in a small chapel covered with a tapestry of Persian silk work with gold, and brilliantly lighted with a vast number of candles. Over a species of altar, and beneath a canopy of blue velvet, surmounted by white and red plumes, was a full-length portrait of Anne of Austria, so perfect in its resemblance that D'Artagnan uttered a cry of surprise on beholding it. One might believe the queen was about to speak. On the altar, and beneath the portrait, was the casket containing the diamond studs. The Duke approached the altar, knelt as a priest might have done before a crucifix, and opened the casket. "Hey," said he, drawing from the casket a large bow of blue ribbon all sparkling with diamonds. "They are the precious studs which I have taken an oath should be buried with me. The Queen gave them to me. The Queen requires them again. Her will be done, like that of God, in all things." Then he began to kiss, one after the other, those dear studs with which he was about to part. All at once he uttered a terrible cry. "What is the matter?" exclaimed D'Artagnan, anxiously. "What has happened to you, my lord?" "All is lost," cried Buckingham, becoming as pale as a corpse. "2 of the studs are wanting. There are only 10. Can you have lost them, my lord, or do you think they have been stolen?" "They have been stolen," replied the Duke, "and it is the cardinal who has dealt this blow. Hold, see, the ribbons which held them are being cut with scissors. If my lord suspects they have been stolen, perhaps the person who stole them still has them in his hands." "Wait, wait," said the Duke. "The only time I have worn these studs was at a ball given by the king 8 days ago at Windsor. The Comtesse de Winter, with whom I had quarreled, became reconciled to me at that ball. That reconciliation was nothing but the vengeance of a jealous woman. I have never seen her from that day. The woman is an agent of the cardinal." "He has agents, then, throughout the world?" cried D'Artagnan. Monday next. Still 5 days before us. That's more time than we want. "Patrick," cried the Duke, opening the door of the chapel. "Patrick." His confidential valet appeared, my jeweler and my secretary. The valet went out with a mute promptitude which showed him accustomed to obey blindly and without reply. But although the jeweler had been mentioned first, it was the secretary who first made his appearance. This was simply because he lived in the hotel. He found Buckingham seated at a table in his bedchamber, writing orders with his own hand. "Mr. Jackson," said he, "go instantly to the Lord Chancellor, and tell him that I charge him with the execution of these orders. I wish them to be promulgated immediately. But, my lord, if the Lord Chancellor interrogates me upon the motives which may have led your grace to adopt such an extraordinary measure, what shall I reply? That such is my pleasure, and that I answer for my will to no man." "Will that be the answer?" replied the secretary, smiling, "which he must transmit to his majesty if, by chance, his majesty should have a curiosity to know why no vessel is to leave any of the ports of Great Britain." "You are right, Mr. Jackson," replied Buckingham. "He will say, in that case, to the king that I am determined on war, and that this measure is my first act of hostility against France." The secretary bowed and retired. "We are safe on that side," said Buckingham, turning toward D'Artagnan. "If the studs are not yet gone to Paris, they will not arrive till after you." "How so?" D'Artagnan looked with stupefaction at a man who thus employed the unlimited power with which he was clothed by the confidence of a king in the prosecution of his intrigues. Buckingham saw by the expression of the young man's face what was passing in his mind, and he smiled. "Yes," said he, "yes, and if Austria is my true queen, upon a word from her, I would betray my country, I would betray my king, I would betray my God. She asked me not to send the Protestants of La Rochelle the assistance I promised them. I have not done so. I broke my word. It is true, but what signifies that? I obeyed my love, and have I not been richly paid for that obedience? It was to that obedience I owe her portrait." D'Artagnan was amazed and note by what fragile and unknown threads the destinies of nations and the lives of men are suspended. He was lost in these reflections when the goldsmith entered. He was an Irishman, one of the most skillful of his craft, and who himself confessed that he gained 100,000 livres a year by the Duke of Buckingham. "Mr. O'Reilly," said the Duke, leading him into the chapel, "look at these diamond studs, and tell me what they are worth apiece." The goldsmith cast a glance at the elegant manner in which they were set, calculated, one with another, what the diamonds were worth, and without hesitation said, 1,500 pistoles each, my lord." "How many days would it require to make 2 studs exactly like them? You see there are 2 wanting." 8 days, my lord." "I will give you 3,000 pistoles apiece if I can have them by the day after tomorrow." "My lord, they shall be yours." "You are a jewel of a man, Mr. O'Reilly, but that is not all. These studs cannot be trusted to anybody. It must be done in the palace." "Impossible, my lord. There is no one but myself can so execute them that one cannot tell the new from the old." The goldsmith knew the Duke. He knew all objection would be useless, and instantly determined how to act. "May I be permitted to inform my wife?" said he. "Oh, you may even see her if you like, my dear Mr. O'Reilly. Your captivity shall be mild, be assured, and as every inconvenience deserves its indemnification, here is, in addition to the price of the studs, an order for 1,000 pistoles, to make you forget the annoyance I cause you." D'Artagnan could not get over the surprise created in him by this minister, who thus open-handed sported with men and millions. As to the goldsmith, he wrote to his wife, sending her the order for the 1,000 pistoles, and charging her to send him, in exchange, his most skillful apprentice, an assortment of diamonds, of which he gave the names and the weight, and the necessary tools. Buckingham conducted the goldsmith to the chamber destined for him, and which, at the end of half an hour, was transformed into a workshop. Then he placed a sentinel at each door, with an order to admit nobody upon any pretense but his valet de chambre, Patrick. We need not add that the goldsmith, O'Reilly, and his assistant were prohibited from going out under any pretext. This point settled, the Duke turned to D'Artagnan. "Now, my young friend," said he, "England is all our own. What do you wish for? What do you desire?" "A bed, my lord," replied D'Artagnan. "At present, I confess, that is the thing I stand most in need of." Buckingham gave D'Artagnan a chamber adjoining his own. He wished to have the young man at hand, not that he at all mistrusted him, but for the sake of having someone to whom he could constantly talk of the Queen. In 1 hour after, the ordinance was published in London that no vessel bound for France should leave port, not even the packet-boat with letters. In the eyes of everybody, this was a declaration of war between the two kingdoms. On the day after the morrow, by 11 o'clock, the 2 diamond studs were finished, and they were so completely imitated, so perfectly alike, that Buckingham could not tell the new ones from the old ones, and experts in such matters would have been deceived as he was. He immediately called D'Artagnan. "Hey," said he to him, "are the diamond studs that you came to bring? And be my witness that I have done all that human power could do." "Be satisfied, my lord, I will tell all that I have seen. But does your grace mean to give me the studs without the casket?" "I will perform your commission, word for word, my lord." "And now," resumed Buckingham, looking earnestly at the young man, "how shall I ever acquit myself of the debt I owe you?" D'Artagnan blushed up to the whites of his eyes. He saw that the Duke was searching for means of making him accept something, and the idea that the blood of his friends and himself was about to be paid for with English gold was strangely repugnant to him. "Let us understand each other, my lord," replied D'Artagnan, "and let us make things clear beforehand in order that there may be no mistake. I am in the service of the King and Queen of France, and form part of the company of Monsieur de Cesset, who, as well as his brother-in-law, Monsieur de Treville, is particularly attached to their majesties. What I have done, then, has been for the Queen, and not at all for your grace. And still further, it is very probable I should not have done anything of this, if it had not been to make myself agreeable to someone who is my lady, as the Queen is yours." "Yes," said the Duke, smiling, "and I even believe that I know that other person. It is—" "My lord, I have not named her," interrupted the young man, warmly. "That is true," said the Duke, "and it is to this person I am bound to discharge my debt of gratitude." "We say, proud as a Scotsman," murmured the Duke of Buckingham. D'Artagnan bowed to the Duke and was retiring. "That's true. For gad, these Frenchmen have no consideration. I had forgotten that England was an island and that you were the king of it. Go to the riverside, ask for the brig Sund, and give this letter to the captain. He will convey you to a little port, where certainly you are not expected, and which is ordinarily only frequented by fishermen. The name of that port? Street Valerie. But listen, when you have arrived there you will go to a mean tavern, without a name and without a sign, a mere fisherman's hut. You cannot be mistaken. There is but one. Afterward, you will ask for the host, and will repeat to him the word forward, which means... Besides, the end justified the means, as you Frenchmen say, does it not?" "Yes, my lord, I accept them," said D'Artagnan, "and if it please God, we will make good use of your presence." "Yes, my lord, but with the hope of soon becoming enemies." "Be satisfied, I promise you that." "I depend upon your word, my lord." D'Artagnan bowed to the Duke, and made his way as quickly as possible to the riverside. Opposite the Tower of London, he found the vessel that had been named to him, delivered his letter to the captain, who, after having it examined by the governor of the port, made immediate preparations to sail. 50 vessels were waiting to set out. Passing alongside one of them, D'Artagnan fancied he perceived on board it the woman among, the same whom the unknown gentleman had called Milady, and whom D'Artagnan had thought so handsome. But thanks to the current of the stream and a fair wind, his vessel passed so quickly that he had little more than a glimpse of her. The next day, about 9 o'clock in the morning, he landed at St. Valery. D'Artagnan went instantly in search of the inn, and easily discovered it by the riotous noise which resounded from it. War between England and France was talk of as near and certain, and the jolly sailors were having a carousal. D'Artagnan made his way through the crowd, advanced toward the host, and pronounced the word forward. The host instantly made him a sign to follow, went out with him by a door which opened into a yard, led him to the stable, where a saddled horse awaited him, and asked him if he stood in need of anything else. "I want to know the route I am to follow," said D'Artagnan. "Go from hence to Blangy, and from Blangy to Neufchâtel. At Neufchâtel, go to the Tavern of the Golden Harrow, give the password to the landlord, and you will find, as you have here, a horse ready saddled." "Have I anything to pay?" demanded D'Artagnan. "Everything is paid," replied the host, "and liberally. Begone, and may God guide you." "Amen," cried the young man, and set off at full gallop. "Your address at Paris?" "Hotel of the Guards, Company of Dessessert." "Enough," replied the questioner. "Which route must I take?" demanded D'Artagnan, in his turn. "That of Rouen, but you will leave the city on your right. You must stop at the little village of Equus, in which there is but one tavern, the Shield of France. Don't condemn it from appearances. You will find a horse in the stables quite as good as this." "The same password?" "Exactly. Adieu, master. A good journey. Gentlemen, do you want anything?" D'Artagnan shook his head and set off at full speed. At Equus, the same scene was repeated. He found as provident a host and a fresh horse. He left his address as he had done before, and set off again at the same pace for Pontoise. At Pontoise, he changed his horse for the last time, and at 9 o'clock galloped into the yard of Treville's hotel. He had made nearly 60 leagues in little more than 12 hours. M. de Treville received him as if he had seen him that same morning. Only, when pressing his hand a little more warmly than usual, he informed him that the company of Dessessert was on duty at the Louvre, and that he might repair at once to his post. Chapter 22. The Ballet of Valet Malazan. On the morrow, nothing was talked of in Paris but the ball which the aldermen of the city were to give to the king and queen, and in which their majesties were to dance the famous La Malazan, the favorite ballet of the king. 8 days had been occupied in preparations at the Hotel de Ville for this important evening. The city carpenters had erected scaffolds upon which the invited ladies were to be placed. The city grocer had ornamented the chambers with 200 flambeaux of white wax, a piece of luxury unheard of at that period, and 20 violins were ordered, and the price for them fixed at double the usual rate, upon condition, said the report, that they should be played all night. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the Sieur de Lacoste, ensign in the King's Guards, followed by 2 officers and several archers of that body, came to the city registrar, named Clement, and demanded of him all the keys of the rooms and offices of the hotel. These keys were given up to him instantly. Each of them had a ticket attached to it, by which it might be recognized, and from that moment the Sieur de Lacoste was charged with the care of all the doors and all the avenues. At 11 o'clock came in his turn Duhallier, captain of the guards, bringing with him 50 archers, who were distributed immediately through the Hotel de Ville, at the doors assigned them. At 3 o'clock came 2 companies of the guards, one French, the other Swiss. The company of French guards was composed of half of M. Duhallier's men, and half of M. Dessessert's men. At 6 in the evening the guests began to come. As fast as they entered, they were placed in the grand saloon, on the platforms prepared for them. At 9 o'clock Madame la Première President arrived. As next to the Queen, she was the most considerable personage of the fête. She was received by the city officials, and placed in a box opposite to that which the Queen was to occupy. At 10 o'clock, the King's collation, consisting of preserves and other delicacies, was prepared in the little room on the side of the Church of St. Jean, in front of the silver buffet of the city, which was guarded by 4 archers. At midnight great cries and loud acclamations were heard. It was a king, who was passing through the streets which led from the Louvre to the Hotel de Ville, and which were all illuminated with colored lanterns. Immediately the aldermen, clothed in their cloth robes and preceded by 6 sergeants, each holding a flambeau in his hand, went to attend upon the king, whom they met on the steps, where the provost of the merchants made him the speech of welcome, a compliment to which his majesty replied with an apology for coming so late, laying the blame upon the cardinal, who had detained him till 11 o'clock, talking of affairs of state. His majesty, in full dress, was accompanied by his royal highness, M. le Comte de Soissons, by the Grand Prior, by the Duc de Longueville, by the Duc d'Euberth, by the Comte de Harcourt, by the Comte de la Rocheguyon, by M. de Linecourt, by M. de Badis, by the Comte de Cramail, and by the Chevalier de Souvray. Everybody noticed that the king looked dull and preoccupied. A private room had been prepared for the king and another for Monsieur. In each of these closets were placed masquerade dresses. The same had been done for the Queen and Madame the President. The nobles and ladies of their Majesties' suites were to dress, 2 by 2, in chambers prepared for the purpose. Before entering his closet, the king desired to be informed the moment the cardinal arrived. Half an hour after the entrance of the king, fresh acclamations were heard. These announced the arrival of the queen. The aldermen did as they had done before, and preceded by their sergeants, advanced to receive their illustrious guest. The queen entered the great hall, and it was remarked that, like the king, she looked dull and even weary. At the moment she entered, the curtain of a small gallery which to that time had been closed was drawn, and the pale face of the cardinal appeared, he being dressed as a Spanish cavalier. His eyes were fixed upon those of the queen, and a smile of terrible joy passed over his lips. The queen did not wear diamond studs. The queen remained for a short time to receive the compliments of the city dignitaries and to reply to the salutations of the ladies. All at once the king appeared with the cardinal at one of the doors of the hall. The cardinal was speaking to him in a low voice, and the king was very pale. The king made his way through the crowd without a mask, and the ribbons of his doublet scarcely tied. He went straight to the queen, and in an altered voice said, "Why, madam, have you not thought proper to wear your diamond studs, when you know it would give me so much gratification?" The queen cast a glance around her, and saw the cardinal behind, with a diabolical smile on his countenance. "Sire," replied the queen, with a faltering voice, "because, in the midst of such a crowd as this, I feared some accident might happen to them. And you were wrong, madam. If I made you that present, it was that you might adorn yourself therewith. I tell you that you were wrong." The voice of the king was tremulous with anger. Everybody looked and listened with astonishment, comprehending nothing of what passed. "Sire," said the queen, "I can send for them to the Louvre, where they are, and thus your majesty's wishes will be complied with." "Do so, madam, do so, and that at once, for within an hour the ballet will commence." The queen bent in token of submission, and followed the ladies who were to conduct her to her room. On his part, the king returned to his apartment. There was a moment of trouble and confusion in the assembly. Everybody had remarked that something had passed between the king and queen, but both of them had spoken so low that everybody, out of respect, withdrew several steps, so that nobody had heard anything. The violins began to sound with all their might, but nobody listened to them. The king came out first from his room. He was in a most elegant hunting costume, and Monsieur and the other nobles were dressed like him. This was the costume that best became the king. So dressed, he really appeared the first gentleman of his kingdom. The cardinal drew near to the king, and placed in his hand a small casket. The king opened it, and found in it 2 diamond studs. "What does this mean?" demanded he of the cardinal. "Nothing," replied the latter. "Only, if the queen has the studs, which I very much doubt, count them, sire, and if you only find 10, ask her majesty who can have stolen from her the 2 studs that are here." The king looked at the cardinal as if to interrogate him, but he had not time to address any question to him. A cry of admiration burst from every mouth. If the king appeared to be the first gentleman of his kingdom, the queen was without doubt the most beautiful woman in France. It is true that the habit of a huntress became her admirably. She wore a beaver hat with blue feathers, a surtout of grey pearl velvet, fastened with diamond clasps, and a petticoat of blue satin, embroidered with silver. On her left shoulder sparkled the diamond studs, on a bow of the same color as the plumes and the petticoat. The king trembled with joy and the cardinal with vexation. Although, distant as they were from a queen, they could not count the studs. The queen had them. The only question was, had she 10 or 12? At that moment the violin sounded the signal for the ballet. The king advanced toward Madame the President, with whom he was to dance, and His Highness Monsieur with the queen. They took their places, and the ballet began. The king danced facing the queen, and every time he passed by her, he devoured with his eyes those studs of which he could not ascertain the number. A cold sweat covered the brow of the cardinal. The ballet lasted an hour, and had 16 entrees. The ballet ended amid the applause of the whole assemblage, and everyone reconducted his lady to a place. But the king took advantage of the privilege he had of leaving his lady to advance eagerly toward the queen. "I thank you, madam," said he, "for the deference you have shown to my wishes, but I think you want 2 of the studs, and I bring them back to you." With these words he held out to the queen the 2 studs the cardinal had given him. "How, sire?" cried the young queen, affecting surprise. "You are giving me, then, 2 more. I shall have 14. In fact, the king counted them, and the 12 studs were all on Her Majesty's shoulder. The king called the cardinal. "What does this mean, Monsieur Cardinal?" asked the king in a severe tone. "This means, sire," replied the cardinal, "that I was desirous of presenting Her Majesty with these 2 studs, and that not daring to offer them myself, I adopted this means of inducing her to accept them. And I am the more grateful to your eminence," replied Anne of Austria, with a smile that proved she was not the dupe of this ingenious gallantry, from being certain that these 2 studs alone have cost you as much as all the others cost His Majesty. Then, saluting the king and the cardinal, the queen resumed her way to the chamber in which she had dressed, and where she was to take off her costume. The attention which we have been obliged to give, during the commencement of the chapter, to the illustrious personages we have introduced into it, has diverted us for an instant from him to whom Anne of Austria owed the extraordinary triumph she had obtained over the cardinal, and who, confounded, unknown, lost in the crowd gathered at one of the doors, looked on at the scene, comprehensible only to 4 persons: the king, the queen, his eminence, and himself. The queen had just regained her chamber, and D'Artagnan was about to retire, when he felt his shoulder lightly touched. He turned and saw a young woman, who made him a sign to follow her. The face of this young woman was covered with a black velvet mask, but notwithstanding this precaution, which was in fact taken rather against others than against him, he at once recognized his usual guide, the light and intelligent Milady Bonacieux. On the evening before, they had scarcely seen each other for a moment in the apartment of the Swiss guard, Germain, whither D'Artagnan had sent for her. The haste which the young woman was in to convey to the queen the excellent news of the happy return of a messenger prevented the 2 lovers from exchanging more than a few words. D'Artagnan therefore followed Milady Bonacieux, moved by a double sentiment, love and curiosity. All the way, and in proportion as the corridors became more deserted, D'Artagnan wished to stop the young woman, seize her and gaze upon her, were it only for a minute. But quick as a bird she glided between his hands, and when he wished to speak to her, her finger placed upon her mouth, with a little imperative gesture full of grace, reminded him that he was under the command of a power which he must blindly obey, and which forbade him even to make the slightest complaint. At length, after winding about for a minute or 2, Milady Bonacieux opened the door of a closet, which was entirely dark, and led D'Artagnan into it. Then she made a fresh sign of silence, and opened a second door concealed by tapestry. The opening of this door disclosed a brilliant light, and she disappeared. D'Artagnan remained for a moment motionless, asking himself where he could be. But soon a ray of light which penetrated through the chamber, together with the warm and perfumed air which reached him from the same aperture, the conversation of 2 or 3 ladies in language at once respectful and refined, and the word Majesty several times repeated, indicated clearly that he was in a closet attached to the queen's apartment. The young man waited in comparative darkness and listened. The queen appeared cheerful and happy, which seemed to astonish the persons who surrounded her and who were accustomed to see her almost always sad and full of care. The queen attributed this joyous feeling to the beauty of the fete, to the pleasure she had experienced in the ballet, and as it is not permissible to contradict a queen, whether she smile or weep, everybody expatiated on the gallantry of the alderman of the city of Paris. Although D'Artagnan did not at all know the queen, he soon distinguished her voice from the others, at first by a slightly foreign accent, and next by that tone of domination naturally impressed upon all royal words. He heard her approach and withdraw from a partially open door, and 2 or 3 times he even saw the shadow of a person intercept the light. At length a hand and an arm, surpassingly beautiful in their form and whiteness, glided through the tapestry. D'Artagnan at once comprehended that this was his recompense. He cast himself on his knees, seized the hand, and touched it respectfully with his lips. Then the hand was withdrawn, leaving it as an object which he perceived to be a ring. The door immediately closed, and D'Artagnan found himself again in complete obscurity. D'Artagnan placed the ring on his finger, and again waited. It was evident that all was not yet over. After the reward of his devotion, that his love was to come. Besides, although the ballet was danced, the evening had scarcely begun. Supper was to be served at 3, and the clock of St. Jean had struck 2:15. The sound of voices diminished by degrees in the adjoining chamber. The company was then heard departing. Then the door of the closet in which D'Artagnan was opened, and Mme. Bonacieux entered. "You at last?" cried D'Artagnan. "Silence," said the young woman, placing her hand upon his lips. "Silence, and go the same way you came." "But where and when shall I see you again?" cried D'Artagnan. "A note which you will find at home will tell you. Begone, begone." At these words he opened the door of the corridor, and pushed D'Artagnan out of the room. D'Artagnan obeyed like a child, without the least resistance or objection, which proved that he was really in love. Chapter 23. The Rendezvous. D'Artagnan ran home immediately, and although it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and he had some of the worst quarters of Paris to traverse, he met with no misadventure. Everyone knows that drunkards and lovers have a protecting deity. He found the door of his passage open, sprang up the stairs, and knocked softly in a manner agreed upon between him and his lackey. Planchet, whom he had sent home 2 hours before from a Hotel de Ville, telling him to sit up for him, opened the door for him. "Has anyone brought a letter for me?" asked D'Artagnan eagerly. "No one has brought a letter, monsieur," replied Planchet, "but one has come of itself." "What do you mean, blockhead?" "I mean to say that when I came in, although I had the key of your apartment in my pocket, and that key had never quit me, I found a letter on the green table cover in your bedroom." "And where's that letter?" "I left it where I found it, monsieur. It is not natural for letters to enter people's houses in this manner. If the window had been open or even ajar, I should think nothing of it. But no, all was hermetically sealed. Beware, monsieur, there is certainly some magic underneath." Meanwhile, the young man had darted into his chamber and opened the letter. It was from Mme. Bonacieux, and was expressed in these terms: "There are many thanks to be offered to you, and to be transmitted to you. Be this evening about 10 o'clock at St. Cloud, in front of the pavilion which stands at the corner of the house of M. d'Estrees. C.B." While reading this letter, D'Artagnan felt his heart dilated and compressed by that delicious spasm which tortures and caresses the hearts of lovers. It was the first billet he had received. It was the first rendezvous that had been granted him. His heart, swelled by the intoxication of joy, felt ready to dissolve away at the very gate of that terrestrial paradise called love. "Well, monsieur," said Planchet, who had observed his master grow red and pale successively, "did I not guess truly? Is it not some bad affair?" "You are mistaken, Planchet," replied D'Artagnan, "and as a proof, there is a crown to drink my health. I am much obliged to monsieur for the crown he has given me, and I promise him to follow his instructions exactly. But it is not the less true that letters which come in this way into shut-up houses fall from heaven, my friend, fall from heaven." "Then monsieur is satisfied?" asked Planchet. "My dear Planchet, I am the happiest of men, and I may profit by monsieur's happiness, and go to bed." "Yes, go. May the blessings of heaven fall upon monsieur. But it is not the less true that letter." And Planchet retired, shaking his head with an air of doubt, which the liberality of D'Artagnan had not entirely effaced. Left alone, D'Artagnan read and reread his billet. Then he kissed and rekissed 20 times the lines traced by the hand of his beautiful mistress. At length he went to bed, fell asleep, and had golden dreams. At 7 o'clock in the morning he arose and called Planchet, who at the second summons opened the door, his countenance not yet quite free from the anxiety of the preceding night. "Planchet," said D'Artagnan, "I am going out for all day. Perhaps you are, therefore, your own master till 7 o'clock in the evening. But at 7 o'clock you must hold yourself in readiness with 2 horses." "There," said Planchet, "we are going again. it appears, to have our hides pierced in all sorts of ways. You will take your musketoon and your pistols. There, now, didn't I say so? Cried Planchet. I was sure of it, the cursed letter. Don't be afraid, you idiot. There is nothing in hand but a party of pleasure. Aye, like the charming journey the other day, when it rained bullets and produced a crop of steel traps. Well, if you are really afraid, Monsieur Planchet, resumed D'Artagnan, I will go without you. I prefer traveling alone to having a companion who entertains the least fear. Monsieur does me wrong, said Planchet. I thought he had seen me at work. Yes, but I thought perhaps you had worn out all your courage the first time. Monsieur shall see that upon occasion I have some left. Only I beg Monsieur not to be too prodigal of it if he wishes it to last long. Do you believe you have still a certain amount of it to expend this evening? I hope so, Monsieur. Well, then, I count on you. At the appointed hour I shall be ready. Only I believe that Monsieur had but one horse in the guard stables. Perhaps there is but one at this moment, but by this evening there will be 4. It appears that our journey was a remounting journey. Then, exactly so, said D'Artagnan, and nodding to Planchet, he went out, and Bonacieux was at his door. D'Artagnan's intention was to go out without speaking to the worthy mercer, but the latter made so polite and friendly a salutation that his tenant felt obliged not only to stop, but to enter into conversation with him. Besides, how is it possible to avoid a little condescension toward a husband whose pretty wife has appointed a meeting with you that same evening at St. Cloud, opposite D'Estrees' pavilion? D'Artagnan approached him with the most amiable air he could assume. The conversation naturally fell upon the incarceration of the poor man, and Bonacieux, who was ignorant that D'Artagnan had overheard his conversation with the stranger among, related to his young tenant the persecutions of that monster, M. de la Femas, whom he never ceased to designate, during his account, by the title of the Cardinal's executioner, and expatiated at great length upon the Bastille, the bolts, the wickets, the dungeons, the gratings, the instruments of torture. D'Artagnan listened to him with exemplary complaisance, and when he had finished said, And Madame Bonacieux, do you know who carried her off? For I do not forget that I owe to that unpleasant circumstance the good fortune of having made your acquaintance. Ow, said Bonacieux, they took good care not to tell me that, and my wife, on her part, has sworn to me by all that's sacred that she does not know. But you, continued M. Bonacieux, in a tone of perfect good fellowship, what has become of you all these days? I have not seen you nor your friends, and I don't think you could gather all that dust that I saw Planchet brush off your boots yesterday from the pavement of Paris. You are right, my dear Monsieur Bonacieux. My friends and I have been on a little journey. Far from here. Oh, Lord, no, about 40 leagues only. We went to take Monsieur Athos to the waters of Forges, where my friends still remain. And you have returned, have you not? Replied M. Bonacieux, giving to his countenance a most sly air. A handsome young fellow like you does not obtain long leaves of absence from his mistress, and we were impatiently waited for at Paris, were we not? My faith, said the young man, laughing, I confess it, and so much more the readily, my dear Bonacieux, as I see there is no concealing anything from you. Yes, I was expected, and very impatiently, I acknowledge. A slight shade passed over the brow of Bonacieux, but so slight that D'Artagnan did not perceive it. And we are going to be recompensed for our diligence, continued the mercer, with a trifling alteration in his voice. So trifling, indeed, that D'Artagnan did not perceive it any more than he had the momentary shade which, an instant before, had darkened the countenance of the worthy man. Ah, may you be a true prophet, said D'Artagnan, laughing. No, what I say, replied Bonacieux, is only that I may know whether I am delaying you. Why that question, my dear host? Asked D'Artagnan. Do you intend to sit up for me? No, but since my arrest and the robbery that was committed in my house, I am alarmed every time I hear a door open, particularly in the night. What the deuce can you expect? I am no swordsman. Well, don't be alarmed if I return at 1, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Indeed, do not be alarmed if I do not come at all." This time Bonacieux became so pale that D'Artagnan could not help perceiving it, and asked him what was the matter. "Nothing," replied Bonacieux. "Nothing. Since my misfortunes I have been subject to faintnesses, which seize me all at once, and I have just felt a cold shiver. Pay no attention to it. You have nothing to occupy yourself with but being happy." "Then I have full occupation, for I am so." "Not yet. Wait a little. This evening, you said." "Well, this evening will come, thank God, and perhaps you look for it with as much impatience as I do. Perhaps this evening Madame Bonacieux will visit the conjugal domicile." "Madame Bonacieux is not at liberty this evening," replied the husband. "Seriously, she is detained at the Louvre this evening by her duties." "So much the worse for you, my dear host, so much the worse. When I am happy, I wish all the world to be so, but it appears it is not possible." The young man departed, laughing at the joke, which he thought he alone could comprehend. "Amuse yourself well," replied Bonacieux, in a sepulchral tone. But D'Artagnan was too far off to hear him, and if he had heard him in the disposition of mind he then enjoyed, he certainly would not have remarked it. He took his way toward the hotel of M. de Treville. His visit of a day before, it is to be remembered, had been very short and very little explicative. He found Treville in a joyful mood. He had thought the king and queen charming at the ball. It is true the cardinal had been particularly ill-tempered. He had retired at 1 o'clock under the pretense of being indisposed. As to their majesties, they did not return to the Louvre till 6 o'clock in the morning. "Now," said Treville, lowering his voice, and looking into every corner of the apartment to see if they were alone, "now let us talk about yourself, my young friend, for it is evident that your happy return has something to do with the joy of the king, the triumph of the queen, and the humiliation of his eminence. You must look out for yourself." "What have I to fear?" replied D'Artagnan, "as long as I shall have the luck to enjoy the favor of their majesties?" "Everything, believe me. The cardinal is not the man to forget a mystification until he has settled account with the mystifier, and the mystifier appears to me to have the air of being a certain young Gascon of my acquaintance. Do you believe that the cardinal is as well posted as yourself, and knows that I have been to London?" "The devil! You have been to London. Was it from London you brought that beautiful diamond that glitters on your finger? Beware, my dear D'Artagnan. A present from an enemy is not a good thing. Are there not some Latin verses upon that subject?" "Stop." "Yes, doubtless," replied D'Artagnan, who had never been able to cram the first rudiments of that language into his head, and who had by his ignorance driven his master to despair. "Yes, doubtless there is one." "There certainly is one," said M. de Treville, who had a tincture of literature, and Monsieur de Benserade was quoting it to me the other day. "Stop a minute. Ah, this is it. Timeo denaus et dona ferentes," which means, beware the enemy who makes he presents. "This diamond does not come from an enemy, monsieur," replied D'Artagnan. "It comes from the queen." "From the queen? Oh, oh," said M. de Treville. "Why, it is indeed a true royal jewel, which is worth 1,000 pistoles if it is worth a denier. By whom did the queen send you this jewel?" "She gave it to me herself." "Where?" "In the room adjoining the chamber in which she changed her toilet." "How?" "Giving me her hand to kiss." "You have kissed the queen's hand?" said M. de Treville, looking earnestly at D'Artagnan. "Her Majesty did me the honor to grant me that favor, and that in the presence of witnesses. Imprudent, thrice imprudent." "No, monsieur, be satisfied. Nobody saw her," replied D'Artagnan, and he related to M. de Treville how the affair came to pass. "Oh, the women, cried the old soldier. "I know them by their romantic imagination. Everything that savors of mystery charms them. So you have seen the arm, that was all. You would meet the queen, and she would not know who you are." "No, but thanks to this diamond," replied the young man. "Listen," said M. de Treville. "Shall I give you counsel, good counsel, the counsel of a friend?" "You will do me honor, monsieur," said D'Artagnan. "Well, then, Off to the nearest goldsmith's, and sell that diamond for the highest price you can get from him. However much of a Jew he may be, he will give you at least 800 pistoles. Pistoles have no name, young man, and that ring has a terrible one, which may betray him who weighs it. Sell this ring, a ring which comes from my sovereign? Never, said D'Artagnan. Then, at least turn the gem inside, you silly fellow, for everybody must be aware that a cadet from Gascony does not find such stones in his mother's jewel case. You think? Then I have something to dread, asked D'Artagnan. I mean to say, young man, that he who sleeps over mine the match of which is already lighted, may consider himself in safety in comparison with you. The devil, said D'Artagnan, whom the positive tone of M. de Treville began to disquiet. The devil, what must I do? Above all things be always on your guard. The cardinal has a tenacious memory and a long arm. You may depend upon it. He will repay you by some ill turn. But of what sort? Hey, how can I tell? Has he not all the tricks of a demon at his command? The least that can be expected is that you will be arrested. What? Will they dare to arrest a man in his majesty's service? Pardieu, they did not scruple much in the case of Athos. At all events, young man, rely upon one who has been 30 years at court. Do not lull yourself in security, or you will be lost. But, on the contrary, and it is I who say it, see enemies in all directions. If anyone seeks a quarrel with you, shun it, were it with a child of 10 years old. If you are attacked by day or by night, fight, but retreat without shame. If you cross a bridge, feel every plank of it with your foot, lest one should give way beneath you. If you pass before a house which is being built, look up, for fear stones should fall upon your head. If you stay out late, be always followed by your lackey, and let your lackey be armed. If, by the by, you can be sure of your lackey. Mistrust everybody, your friend, your brother, your mistress above all. D'Artagnan blushed. My mistress above all, repeated he, mechanically, and why rather than another? Because a mistress is one of the cardinal's favorite means. He has not one that is more expeditious. A woman will sell you for 10 pistoles. Witness Delilah. You are acquainted with the scriptures. D'Artagnan thought of the appointment Emmy Bonacieux had made with him for that very evening. But we are bound to say, to the credit of our hero, that the bad opinion entertained by M. de Treville of women in general did not inspire him with the least suspicion of his pretty hostess. But, apropos, resumed M. de Treville, what has become of your 3 companions? I was about to ask you if you had heard any news of them. None, monsieur. Well, I left them on my road. Porthos at Chantilly, with a jewel on his hands, Aramis at Crèvecoeur, with a ball in his shoulder, and Athos at Amiens, detained by an accusation of coining. See there, now, said M. de Treville, and how the devil did you escape? By a miracle, monsieur, I must acknowledge, with a sword thrust in my breast, and by nailing the Comte de Wardes on the byroad to Calais, like a butterfly on a tapestry. There again, de Wardes, one of the cardinal's men, a cousin of Rochefort. Stop, my friend, I have an idea. Speak, monsieur. In your place, I would do one thing. What? While His Eminence was seeking for me in Paris, I would take, without sound of drum or trumpet, the road to Picardy, and would go and make some inquiries concerning my 3 companions. What the devil? They merit richly that piece of attention on your part. The advice is good, monsieur, and tomorrow I will set out. Tomorrow, and why not this evening? This evening, monsieur, I am detained in Paris by indispensable business. Ah, young man, some flirtation or other. Take care. I repeat to you, take care. It is woman who has ruined us, still ruins us, and will ruin us, as long as the world stands. Take my advice and set out this evening. Impossible, monsieur. You have given your word, then? Yes, monsieur. Ah, that's quite another thing. But promise me, if you should not be killed tonight, that you will go tomorrow. I promise it. Do you need money? I have still 50 pistoles. That, I think, is as much as I shall want. But your companions? I don't think they can be in need of any. We left Paris, each with 75 pistoles in his pocket. Shall I see you again before your departure? I think not, monsieur, unless something new should happen. Well, a pleasant journey. Thanks, monsieur. D'Artagnan left M. de Treville, touched more than ever by his paternal solicitude for his musketeers. He called successively at the abodes of Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. Neither of them had returned. Their lackeys likewise were absent, and nothing had been heard of either the one or the other. He would have inquired after them of their mistresses, but he was neither acquainted with Porthos's nor Aramis's, and as to Athos, he had none. As he passed the Hotel des Gardes, he took a glance into the stables. 3 of the 4 horses had already arrived. Planchet, all astonishment, was busy grooming them, and had already finished 2. "Aye, monsieur," said Planchet, on perceiving D'Artagnan, "how glad I am to see you." "Why so, Planchet?" asked the young man. "Do you place confidence in our landlord, Monsieur Bonacieux?" "I? Not the least in the world." "Oh, you do quite right, monsieur. But why this question?" "Because, while you were talking with him, I watched you without listening to you, and, monsieur, his countenance changed color 2 or 3 times." "Bow!" Preoccupied as monsieur was with the letter he had received, he did not observe that. But I, whom the strange fashion in which that letter came into the house had placed on my guard, I did not lose a movement of his features. "And you found it?" "Traitorous, monsieur." "Indeed." "Still more. As soon as monsieur had left and disappeared round the corner of the street, Monsieur Bonacieux took his hat, shut his door, and set off at a quick pace in an opposite direction. It seems you are right, Planchet. All this appears to be a little mysterious, and be assured that we will not pay him our rent until the matter shall be categorically explained to us. Monsieur jests, but monsieur will see. What would you have, Planchet? What must come is written. Monsieur does not then renounce his excursion for this evening. Quite the contrary, Planchet. The more will I have toward Monsieur Bonacieux, the more punctual I shall be in keeping the appointment made by that letter which makes you so uneasy. Then that is Monsieur's determination. Undeniably, my friend, at 9 o'clock. Then, be ready here at the hotel. I will come and take you. Planchet, seeing there was no longer any hope of making his master renounce his project, heaved a profound sigh and set to work to groom the 3rd horse. As to D'Artagnan, being at bottom a prudent youth, instead of returning home, went and dined with the Gascon priest, who, at the time of the distress of the 4 friends, had given them a breakfast of chocolate. Chapter 24. The Pavilion. At 9 o'clock D'Artagnan was at the Hotel des Gardes. He found Planchet already. The 4th horse had arrived. Planchet was armed with his musketoon and a pistol. D'Artagnan had his sword and placed 2 pistols in his belt. Then both mounted and departed quietly. It was quite dark, and no one saw them go out. Planchet took place behind his master, and kept at a distance of 10 paces from him. D'Artagnan crossed the quays, went out by the gate of La Conference, and followed the road, much more beautiful than it is now, which leads to St. Cloud. As long as he was in the city, Planchet kept at the respectful distance he had imposed upon himself, but as soon as the road began to be more lonely and dark, he drew softly nearer, so that when they entered the Bois de Boulogne, he found himself riding quite naturally side by side with his master. In fact, we must not dissemble that the oscillation of the tall trees and the reflection of the moon in the dark underwood gave him serious uneasiness. D'Artagnan could not help perceiving that something more than usual was passing in the mind of his lackey, and said, "Well, Monsieur Planchet, what is the matter with us now? Don't you think, monsieur, that woods are like churches?" "How so, Planchet?" "Because we dare not speak aloud in one or the other." "But why did you not dare to speak aloud, Planchet? Because you are afraid." "Afraid of being heard?" "Yes, monsieur. Afraid of being heard. Why, There is nothing improper in our conversation, my dear Planchet, and no one could find fault with it. Ah, monsieur, replied Planchet, recurring to his besetting idea that Monsieur Bonacieux has something vicious in his eyebrows and something very unpleasant in the play of his lips. What the devil makes you think of Bonacieux? Monsieur, we think of what we can, and not of what we will. Because you are a coward, Planchet. Monsieur, we must not confound prudence with cowardice. Prudence is a virtue. And you are very virtuous, are you not, Planchet? Monsieur, is not that the barrel of the musket which glitters yonder? Had we not better lower our heads? In truth, murmured D'Artagnan, to whom M. de Treville's recommendation recurred, this animal will end by making me afraid. And he put his horse into a trot. Planchet followed the movements of his master as if he had been his shadow, and was soon trotting by his side. Are we going to continue this pace all night? Asked Planchet. No, you are at your journey's end. How, monsieur? And you? I am going a few steps farther. And monsieur leaves me here alone. You are afraid, Planchet. No, I only beg leave to observe to monsieur that the night will be very cold, that chills bring on rheumatism, and that a lackey who has the rheumatism makes but a poor servant, particularly to a master as active as monsieur. Well, if you are cold, Planchet, you can go into one of those cabarets that you see yonder, and be in waiting for me at the door by 6 o'clock in the morning. Monsieur, I have eaten and drunk respectfully the crown you gave me this morning, so that I have not a sou left in case I should be cold. Here's half a pistole. Tomorrow morning. D'Artagnan sprang from his horse, threw the bridle to Planchet, and departed at a quick pace, felting his cloak around him. Good Lord, how cold I am, cried Planchet, as soon as he had lost sight of his master, and in such haste was he to warm himself that he went straight to a house set out with all the attributes of a suburban tavern, and knocked at the door. In the meantime, D'Artagnan, who had plunged into a bypath, continued his route and reached St. Cloud. But instead of following the main street, he turned behind the chateau, reached a sort of retired lane, and found himself soon in front of the pavilion named. It was situated in a very private spot. A high wall, at the angle of which was a pavilion, ran along one side of this lane, and on the other was a little garden connected with a poor cottage which was protected by a hedge from passers-by. He gained the place appointed, and as no signal had been given him by which to announce his presence, he waited. Not the least noise was to be heard. It might be imagined that he was 100 miles from the capital. D'Artagnan leaned against the hedge, after having cast a glance behind it. Beyond that hedge, that garden, and that cottage, a dark mist enveloped with its folds at immensity where Paris slept, a vast void from which glittered a few luminous points, the funeral stars of that hell. But for D'Artagnan all aspects were clothed happily, all ideas wore a smile, all shades were diaphanous. The appointed hour was about to strike. In fact, at the end of a few minutes the belfry of St. Cloud let fall slowly 10 strokes from its sonorous jaws. There was something melancholy in this brazen voice pouring out its lamentations in the middle of the night, but each of those strokes, which made up the expected hour, vibrated harmoniously to the heart of the young man. His eyes were fixed upon the little pavilion situated at the angle of the wall, of which all the windows were closed with shutters, except one on the first story. Through this window shone a mild light which silvered the foliage of 2 or 3 linden trees which formed a group outside the park. There could be no doubt that behind this little window, which threw 4 such friendly beams, the pretty enemy Bonacieux expected him. Wrapped in this sweet idea, D'Artagnan waited half an hour without the least impatience, his eyes fixed upon the charming little abode of which he could perceive a part of the ceiling with its gilded mouldings, attesting the elegance of the rest of the apartment. The belfry of St. Cloud sounded 10:30. This time, without knowing why, D'Artagnan felt a cold shiver run through his veins. Perhaps the cold began to affect him, and he took a perfectly physical sensation for a moral impression. Then the idea seized him that he had read incorrectly, and that the appointment was for 11 o'clock. He drew near to the window, and placing himself so that a ray of light should fall upon the letter as he held it, he drew it from his pocket and read it again. But he had not been mistaken. The appointment was for 10 o'clock. He went and resumed his post, beginning to be rather uneasy at this silence and the solitude. 11 o'clock sounded. D'Artagnan began now really to fear that something had happened to Aramis Bonacieux. He clapped his hands 3 times, the ordinary signal of lovers, but nobody replied to him, not even an echo. He then thought, with a touch of vexation, that perhaps the young woman had fallen asleep while waiting for him. He approached the wall and tried to climb it, but the wall had been recently pointed, and D'Artagnan could get no hold. At that moment he thought of the trees, upon whose leaves the light still shone, and as one of them drooped over the road, he thought that from its branches he might get a glimpse of the interior of the pavilion. The tree was easy to climb. Besides, D'Artagnan was but 20 years old, and consequently had not yet forgotten his schoolboy habits. In an instant he was among the branches, and his keen eyes plunged through the transparent panes into the interior of the pavilion. It was a strange thing, and one which made D'Artagnan tremble from the sole of his foot to the roots of his hair, to find that this soft light, this calm lamp, enlightened a scene of fearful disorder. One of the windows was broken. The door of the chamber had been beaten in and hung, split in two, on its hinges. A table, which had been covered with an elegant supper, was overturned. The decanters broken in pieces, and the fruits crushed, strewed the floor. Everything in the apartment gave evidence of a violent and desperate struggle. D'Artagnan even fancied he could recognize amid this strange disorder fragments of garments and some bloody spots staining the cloth and the curtains. He hastened to descend into the street with a frightful beating at his heart. He wished to see if he could find other traces of violence. The little soft light shone on in the calmness of the night. D'Artagnan then perceived a thing that he had not before remarked, for nothing had led him to the examination, that the ground, trampled here and hoof-marked there, presented confused traces of men and horses. Besides, the wheels of a carriage, which appeared to have come from Paris, had made a deep impression in the soft earth, which did not extend beyond the pavilion, but turned again toward Paris. At length D'Artagnan, in pursuing his researches, found near the wall a woman's torn glove. This glove, wherever it had not touched the muddy ground, was of irreproachable odor. It was one of those perfumed gloves that lovers like to snatch from a pretty hand. As D'Artagnan pursued his investigations, a more abundant and more icy sweat rolled in large drops from his forehead. His heart was oppressed by a horrible anguish. His respiration was broken and short, and yet he said, to reassure himself, that this pavilion perhaps had nothing in common with Aramis Bonacieux, that the young woman had made an appointment with him before the pavilion, and not in the pavilion, that she might have been detained in Paris by her duties, or perhaps by the jealousy of her husband. But all these reasons were combated, destroyed, overthrown by that feeling of intimate pain which, on certain occasions, takes possession of our being, and cries to us so as to be understood unmistakably that some great misfortune is hanging over us. Then D'Artagnan became almost wild. He ran along the high road, took the path he had before taken, and reaching the ferry, interrogated the boatman. About 7 o'clock in the evening, the boatman had taken over a young woman, wrapped in a black mantle, who appeared to be very anxious not to be recognized, but entirely on account of her precautions. The boatman had paid more attention to her and discovered that she was young and pretty. There were then, as now, a crowd of young and pretty women who came to St. Cloud, and who had reasons for not being seen, and yet D'Artagnan did not for an instant doubt that it was Aramis Bonacieux whom the boatman had noticed. D'Artagnan took advantage of a lamp which burned in the cabin of the ferryman to read the billet of Aramis Bonacieux once again, and satisfy himself that he had not been mistaken, that the appointment was at St. Cloud and not elsewhere, before the Destrezes pavilion and not in another street. Everything conspired to prove to D'Artagnan that his presentiments had not deceived him, and that a great misfortune had happened. He again ran back to the chateau. It appeared to him that something might have happened at the pavilion in his absence, and that fresh information awaited him. The lane was still deserted, and the same calm, soft light shone through the window. D'Artagnan then thought of that cottage, silent and obscure, which had no doubt seen all and could tell its tale. The gate of the enclosure was shut, but he leaped over the hedge, and in spite of the barking of a chained-up dog, went up to the cabin. No one answered to his first knocking. A silence of death reigned in the cabin as in the pavilion, but as the cabin was his last resource, he knocked again. It soon appeared to him that he heard a slight noise within, a timid noise which seemed to tremble lest it should be heard. Then D'Artagnan ceased knocking, and prayed with an accent so full of anxiety and promises, terror and cajolery, that his voice was of a nature to reassure the most fearful. At length an old, worm-eaten shutter was opened, or rather pushed ajar, but closed again as soon as the light from a miserable lamp which burned in the corner had shone upon the baldric, sword belt, and pistol pommels of D'Artagnan. Nevertheless, rapid as the movement had been, D'Artagnan had had time to get a glimpse of the head of an old man. "In the name of heaven," cried he, "listen to me. I have been waiting for someone who has not come. I am dying with anxiety. Has anything particular happened in the neighborhood? Speak." The window was again opened slowly, and the same face appeared, only it was now still more pale than before. D'Artagnan related his story simply, with the omission of names. He told how he had a rendezvous with a young woman before that pavilion, and how, not seeing her come, he had climbed the linden tree, and by the light of the lamp had seen the disorder of the chamber. The old man listened attentively, making a sign only that it was all so, and then, when D'Artagnan had ended, he shook his head with an air that announced nothing good. "What do you mean?" cried D'Artagnan. "In the name of heaven, explain yourself." "Oh, monsieur," said the old man, "ask me nothing, for if I dared tell you what I have seen, certainly no good would befall me." "You have, then, seen something?" replied D'Artagnan. "In that case, in the name of heaven," continued he, throwing him a pistole, "tell me what you have seen, and I will pledge you the word of a gentleman that not one of your words shall escape from my heart." The old man read so much truth and so much grief in the face of the young man that he made him a sign to listen, and repeated in a low voice, "It was scarcely 9 o'clock when I heard a noise in the street, and was wondering what it could be, when on coming to my door, I found that somebody was endeavoring to open it. As I am very poor and am not afraid of being robbed, I went and opened the gate and saw 3 men, at a few paces from it. In the shadow was a carriage with 2 horses, and some saddle horses. These horses evidently belonged to the 3 men, who were dressed as cavaliers. My worthy gentleman," cried I, "what do you want?" "You must have a letter," said he who appeared to be the leader of the party. "Yes, monsieur, the one with which I gather my fruit." "Lend it to us, and go into your house again. There is a crown for the annoyance we have caused you. Only remember this, if you speak a word of what you may see or what you may hear, for you will look and you will listen, I am quite sure, however we may threaten you, you are lost." At these words he threw me a crown, which I picked up, and he took the ladder. After shutting the gate behind them, I pretended to return to the house, but I immediately went out a back door, and stealing along in the shade of the hedge, I gained yonder clump of elder, from which I could hear and see everything. The 3 men brought the carriage up quietly, and took out of a little man, stout, short, elderly, and commonly dressed in clothes of a dark color, who ascended the ladder very carefully, looked suspiciously in at the window of the pavilion, came down as quietly as he had gone up, and whispered, "It is she." Immediately, he who had spoken to me approached the door of the pavilion, opened it with a key he had in his hand, closed the door and disappeared, while at the same time the other 2 men ascended the ladder. The little old man remained at the coach door. The coachman took care of his horses. The lackey held the saddle horses. All at once great cries resounded in the pavilion, and a woman came to the window and opened it as if to throw herself out of it. But as soon as she perceived the other 2 men, she fell back and they went into the chamber. Then I saw no more, but I heard the noise of breaking furniture. The woman screamed and cried for help, but her cries were soon stifled. 2 of the men appeared, bearing the woman in their arms, and carried her to the carriage, into which the little old man got after her. The leader closed the window, came out an instant after by the door, and satisfied himself that the woman was in the carriage. His 2 companions were already on horseback. He sprang into his saddle. The lackey took his place by the coachman. The carriage went off at a quick pace, escorted by the 3 horsemen, and all was over. From that moment I have neither seen nor heard anything. D'Artagnan, entirely overcome by this terrible story, remained motionless and mute, while all the demons of anger and jealousy were howling in his heart. "But, my good gentleman," resumed the old man, upon whom this mute despair certainly produced a greater effect than cries and tears would have done, "do not take on so. They did not kill her, and that's a comfort." "Can you guess," said D'Artagnan, "who was the man who headed this infernal expedition?" "I don't know him." "But as you spoke to him, you must have seen him." "Oh, it's a description you want." "Exactly so. A tall, dark man, with black mustache, dark eyes, and the air of a gentleman." "That's the man," cried D'Artagnan. "Again forever he is my demon, apparently. And the other, which? The short one. Oh, he was not a gentleman, I'll answer for it. Besides, he did not wear a sword, and the others treated him with small consideration." "Some lackey," murmured D'Artagnan. Poor woman, what have they done with you?" "You have promised to be secret, my good monsieur," said the old man, "and I renew my promise. Be easy, I am a gentleman. A gentleman has but his word, and I have given you mine." With a heavy heart, D'Artagnan again bent his way toward the ferry. Sometimes he hoped it could not be Emily Bonacieux, and that he should find her next day at the Louvre. Sometimes he feared she had had an intrigue with another, who, in a jealous fit, had surprised her and carried her off. His mind was torn by doubt, grief, and despair. "Oh, if I had my 3 friends here," cried he, "I should have, at least, some hopes of finding her, but who knows what has become of them?" It was past midnight. The next thing was to find Planchet. D'Artagnan went successively into all the cabarets in which there was a light, but could not find Planchet in any of them. At the 6 he began to reflect that the search was rather dubious. D'Artagnan had appointed 6 o'clock in the morning for his lackey, and wherever he might be, he was right. Besides, it came into the young man's mind that by remaining in the environs of the spot on which this sad event had passed, he would, perhaps, have some light thrown upon the mysterious affair. At the 6th cabaret, then, as we said, D'Artagnan stopped, asked for a bottle of wine of the best quality, and placing himself in the darkest corner of the room, determined thus to wait till daylight. But this time again his hopes were disappointed, and although he listened with all his ears, he heard nothing amid the oaths, coarse jokes, and abuse which passed between the laborious servants and carters who comprised the honorable society of which he formed a part, which could put him upon the least track of her who had been stolen from him. He was compelled, then, after having swallowed the contents of his bottle, to pass the time as well as to evade suspicion, to fall into the easiest position in his corner, and to sleep, whether well or ill. D'Artagnan, be it remembered, was only 20 years old, and at that age sleep has its imprescriptible rights which it imperiously insists upon, even with the saddest hearts. Toward 6 o'clock D'Artagnan awoke with that uncomfortable feeling which generally accompanies the break of day after a bad night. He was not long in making his toilet. He examined himself to see if advantage had been taken of his sleep, and having found his diamond ring on his finger, his purse in his pocket, and his pistols in his belt, he rose, paid for his bottle, and went out to try if he could have any better luck in his search after his lackey than he had had the night before. The first thing he perceived through the damp grey mist was honest Planchet, who, with the 2 horses in hand, awaited him at the door of a little blind cabaret, before which D'Artagnan had passed without even a suspicion of its existence. Chapter 25. Porthos. Instead of returning directly home, D'Artagnan alighted at the door of M. de Treville, and ran quickly up the stairs. This time he had decided to relate all that had passed. M. de Treville would doubtless give him good advice as to the whole affair. Besides, as M. de Treville saw the Queen almost daily, he might be able to draw from Her Majesty some intelligence of the poor young woman, whom they were doubtless making pay very dearly for her devotedness to her mistress. M. de Treville listened to the young man's account with a seriousness which proved that he saw something else in this adventure besides a love affair. When D'Artagnan had finished, he said, all this savours of his eminence, a league off." "But what is to be done?" said D'Artagnan. "Nothing, absolutely nothing, at present, but quitting Paris, as I told you, as soon as possible." I will see the queen. I will relate to her the details of the disappearance of this poor woman, of which she is no doubt ignorant. These details will guide her on her part, and on your return, I shall perhaps have some good news to tell you. Rely on me." D'Artagnan knew that, although a Gascon, M. de Treville was not in the habit of making promises, and that when by chance he did promise, he more than kept his word. He bowed to him, then, full of gratitude for the past and for the future, and the worthy captain, who on his side felt a lively interest in this young man, so brave and so resolute, pressed his hand kindly, wishing him a pleasant journey. Determined to put the advice of M. de Treville in practice instantly, D'Artagnan directed his course toward the Rue des Vassiers, in order to superintend the packing of his valise. On approaching the house, he perceived M. Bonacieux in mourning costume, standing at his threshold. All that the prudent Planchet had said to him the preceding evening about the sinister character of the old man recurred to the mind of D'Artagnan, who looked at him with more attention than he had done before. In fact, in addition to that yellow, sickly paleness which indicates the insinuation of the bile in the blood, and which might, besides, be accidental, D'Artagnan remarked something perfidiously significant in the play of the wrinkled features of his countenance. A rogue does not laugh in the same way that an honest man does. A hypocrite does not shed the tears of a man of good faith. All falsehood is a mask, and however well made the mask may be, with a little attention we may always succeed in distinguishing it from the true face. It appeared, then, to D'Artagnan that M. Bonacieux wore a mask, and likewise that mask was most disagreeable to look upon. In consequence of this feeling of repugnance, he was about to pass without speaking to him, but, as he had done the day before, M. Bonacieux accosted him. "Well, young man," said he, "we appear to pass rather gay nights. 7 o'clock in the morning. Peste, you seem to reverse ordinary customs, and come home at the hour when other people are going out. No one can reproach you for anything of the kind, Monsieur Bonacieux," said the young man. "You are a model for regular people. It is true that when a man possesses a young and pretty wife, he has no need to seek happiness elsewhere. Happiness comes to meet him, does it not, Monsieur Bonacieux?" Bonacieux became as pale as death, and grinned a ghastly smile. Ah, said Bonacieux, "you are a jocular companion. But where the devil were you getting last night, my young master? It does not appear to be very clean in the crossroads." D'Artagnan glanced down at his boots, all covered with mud, but that same glance fell upon the shoes and stockings of the mercer, and it might have been said they had been dipped in the same mud heap. Both were stained with splashes of mud of the same appearance. Then a sudden idea crossed the mind of D'Artagnan. That little stout man, short and elderly, that sort of lackey, dressed in dark clothes, treated without ceremony by the men wearing swords who composed the escort, was Bonacieux himself. The husband had presided at the abduction of his wife. A terrible inclination seized D'Artagnan to grasp the mercer by the throat and strangle him, but, as we have said, he was a very prudent youth, and he restrained himself. However, the revolution which appeared upon his countenance was so visible that Bonacieux was terrified at it, and he endeavored to draw back a step or two, but as he was standing before the half of the door which was shut, the obstacle compelled him to keep his place. "Ah, but you are joking, my worthy man," said D'Artagnan. "It appears to me that if my boots need a sponge, your stockings and shoes stand in equal need of a brush. May you not have been philandering a little also, Monsieur Bonacieux? Oh, the devil! That's unpardonable in a man of your age, and who, besides, has such a pretty wife as yours." "Oh, Lord, no," said Bonacieux. "But yesterday I went to Saint Mandé to make some inquiries after a servant, as I cannot possibly do without one, and the roads were so bad that I brought back all this mud, which I have not yet had time to remove." The place named by Bonacieux as that which had been the object of his journey was a fresh proof in support of the suspicions D'Artagnan had conceived. Bonacieux had named Mandé because Mandé was in an exactly opposite direction from St. Cloud. This probability afforded him his first consolation. If Bonacieux knew where his wife was, one might, by extreme means, force the mercer to open his teeth and let his secret escape. The question, then, was how to change this probability into a certainty. "Pardon," my dear Monsieur Bonacieux, if I don't stand upon ceremony," said D'Artagnan, "but nothing makes one so thirsty as want of sleep. I am parched with thirst. Allow me to take a glass of water in your apartment. You know that is never refused among neighbors." Without waiting for the permission of his host, D'Artagnan went quickly into the house and cast a rapid glance at the bed. It had not been used. Bonacieux had not been abed. He had only been back an hour or two. He had accompanied his wife to the place of confinement, or else at least to the first relay. "Thanks, Monsieur Bonacieux," said D'Artagnan, emptying his glass. "That is all I wanted of you. I will now go up into my apartment. I will make Planchet brush my boots, and when he has done, I will, if you like, send him to you to brush your shoes." He left the mercer quite astonished at his singular farewell, and asking himself if he had not been a little inconsiderate. At the top of the stairs he found Planchet in a great fright. "Aye, monsieur," cried Planchet, as soon as he perceived his master, "here's more trouble. I thought you would never come in." "What's the matter now, Planchet?" demanded D'Artagnan. "Oh, I give you 100, I give you 1,000 times a guess, monsieur, the visit I received in your absence. When? About half an hour ago, while you were at Monsieur de Treville's." "Who has been here? Come, speak." "Monsieur de Cavos." "Monsieur de Cavos in person." "The captain of the Cardinal's guards." "Himself? Did he come to arrest me?" "I have no doubt that he did, monsieur, for all his wheedling manner." "Was he so sweet, then?" "Indeed, he was all honey, monsieur." "Indeed." "He came," he said, "on the part of his Eminence, who wished you well, and to beg you to follow him to the Palais Royal." "What did you answer him?" "That the thing was impossible, seeing that you were not at home, as he could see." "Well, what did he say then?" "That you must not fail to call upon him in the course of the day." And then he added in a low voice, "Tell your master that his Eminence is very well disposed toward him, and that his fortune perhaps depends upon this interview." "The snare is rather melodrama for the cardinal," replied the young man, smiling. "Oh, I saw the snare, and I answered you would be quite in despair on your return." "Where has he gone?" asked Monsieur de Cavos. "To Troyes, in Champagne," I answered. "And when did he set out?" "Yesterday evening." "Planchet, my friend," interrupted D'Artagnan, "you are really a precious fellow. You will understand, monsieur, I thought there would be still time, if you wish, to see Monsieur de Cavos to contradict me by saying you were not yet gone. The faucet would then lie at my door, and as I am not a gentleman, I may be allowed to lie. Be of good heart, Planchet, you shall preserve your reputation as a veracious man." In a quarter of an hour we set off. "That's the advice I was about to give, monsieur. And where are we going, may I ask, without being too curious?" "Pardieu, in the opposite direction to that which you said I was gone. Besides, are you not as anxious to learn news of Grimaud, Mouston, and Bazin as I am to know what has become of Athos, Porthos, and Aramis?" "Yes, monsieur," said Planchet, "and I will go as soon as you please. Indeed, I think provincial air will suit us much better just now than the air of Paris. So then, pack up our luggage, Planchet, and let us be off. On my part, I will go out with my hands in my pockets, that nothing may be suspected. You may join me at the Hotel des Gardes. By the way, Planchet, I think you are right with respect to our host, and that he is decidedly a frightfully low wretch." "Ah, monsieur, you may take my word when I tell you anything. I am a physiognomist, I assure you." D'Artagnan went out first, as had been agreed upon. Then, in order that he might have nothing to reproach himself with, he directed his steps, for the last time, toward the residences of his three friends. No news had been received of them. Only a letter, all perfumed and of an elegant writing in small characters, had come for Aramis. D'Artagnan took charge of it. 10 minutes afterward Planchet joined him at the stables of the Hotel des Gardes. D'Artagnan, in order that there might be no time lost, had saddled his horse himself. "That's well," said he to Planchet, when the latter added the portmanteau to the equipment. "Now saddle the other 3 horses." "Do you think, then, monsieur, that we shall travel faster with 2 horses apiece?" said Planchet, with his shrewd air. "No, Monsieur Jester," replied D'Artagnan. "But with our 4 horses we may bring back our 3 friends, if we should have the good fortune to find them living." "Which is a great chance," replied Planchet, "but we must not despair of the mercy of God." "Amen," said D'Artagnan, getting into his saddle. As they went from the Hôtel des Gardes, they separated, leaving the street at opposite ends, one having to quit Paris by the Barrière de la Villette and the other by the Barrière Montmartre, to meet again beyond St. Denis. A strategic maneuver which, having been executed with equal punctuality, was crowned with the most fortunate results. D'Artagnan and Planchet entered Pierrefitte together. Planchet was more courageous, it must be admitted, by day than by night. His natural prudence, however, never forsook him for a single instant. He had forgotten not one of the incidents of the first journey, and he looked upon everybody he met on the road as an enemy. It followed that his hat was forever in his hand, which procured him some severe reprimands from D'Artagnan, who feared that his excessive politeness would lead people to think he was the lackey of a man of no consequence. Nevertheless, whether the passengers were really touched by the urbanity of Planchet, or whether this time nobody was posted on the young man's road, our 2 travelers arrived at Chantilly without any accident, and alighted at the tavern of Great St. Martin, the same at which they had stopped on their first journey. The host, on seeing a young man followed by a lackey with 2 extra horses, advanced respectfully to the door. Now, as they had already traveled 11 leagues, D'Artagnan thought it time to stop, whether Porthos were or were not in the inn. Perhaps it would not be prudent to ask at once what had become of the musketeer. The result of these reflections was that D'Artagnan, without asking information of any kind, alighted, commended the horses to the care of his lackey, entered a small room destined to receive those who wished to be alone, and desired the host to bring him a bottle of his best wine, and as good a breakfast as possible, a desire which further corroborated the high opinion the innkeeper had formed of the traveler at first sight. D'Artagnan was therefore served with miraculous celerity. The regiment of the Guards was recruited among the first gentlemen of the kingdom, and D'Artagnan, followed by a lackey, and traveling with 4 magnificent horses, despite the simplicity of his uniform, could not fail to make a sensation. The host desired himself to serve him, which D'Artagnan, perceiving, ordered 2 glasses to be brought, and commenced the following conversation. "My faith, my good host," said D'Artagnan, filling the 2 glasses, "I ask for a bottle of your best wine, and if you have deceived me, you will be punished in what you have sinned. For seeing that I hate drinking by myself, you shall drink with me. Take your glass, then, and let us drink. But what shall we drink to, so as to avoid wounding any susceptibility? Let us drink to the prosperity of your establishment." "Your lordship does me much honor," said the host, "and I thank you sincerely for your kind wish. But don't mistake," said D'Artagnan, "there is more selfishness in my toast than perhaps you may think, for it is only in prosperous establishments that one is well received. In hotels that do not flourish, everything is in confusion, and the traveler is a victim to the embarrassments of his host. Now, I travel a great deal, particularly on this road, and I wish to see all innkeepers making a fortune. It seems to me," said the host, "that this is not the first time I have had the honor of seeing monsieur. Bow! I have passed perhaps 10 times through Chantilly, and out of the 10 times I have stopped 3 or 4 times at your house at least. Why, I was here only 10 or 12 days ago. I was conducting some friends, musketeers, one of whom, by the by, had a dispute with a stranger, a man who sought a quarrel with him, for I don't know what." "Exactly so," said the host. "I remember it perfectly. It is not Monsieur Porthos that your lordship means." "Yes, that is my companion's name. My God, my dear host, tell me if anything has happened to him. Your lordship must have observed that he could not continue his journey. Why, to be sure, he promised to rejoin us, and we have seen nothing of him. He has done us the honor to remain here." "What, he had done you the honor to remain here?" Yes, monsieur, in this house, and we are even a little uneasy. On what account? Of certain expenses he has contracted. Well, but whatever expenses he may have incurred, I'm sure he is in a condition to pay them. Aye, monsieur, you infuse genuine balm into my blood. We have made considerable advances, and this very morning the surgeon declared that if Monsieur Porthos did not pay him, he should look to me, as it was I who had sent for him. Porthos is wounded. Then, I cannot tell you, monsieur. What? You cannot tell me? Surely you ought to be able to tell me better than any other person. Yes, but in our situation we must not say all we know, particularly as we have been warned that our ears should answer for our tongues. Well, can I see Porthos? Certainly, monsieur. Take the stairs on your right. Go up the first flight and knock at number 1. Only warn him that it is you. Why should I do that? Because, monsieur, some mischief might happen to you. Of what kind, in the name of wonder? Monsieur Porthos may imagine you belong to the house, and in a fit of passion might run his sword through you or blow out your brains. What have you done to him? Then, we have asked him for money. The devil, I can understand that. It is a demand that Porthos takes very ill when he is not in funds, but I know he must be so at present. We thought so, too, monsieur, as our house is carried on very regularly, and we make out our bills every week. At the end of 8 days we presented our account, but it appeared we had chosen an unlucky moment, for at the first word on the subject, he sent us to all the devils. It is true he had been playing the day before. Playing the day before? And with whom? Lord, who can say, monsieur? With some gentleman who was traveling this way, to whom he proposed a game of lansquenet. That's it, then, and the foolish fellow lost all he had. Even to his horse, monsieur, for when the gentleman was about to set out, we perceived that his lackey was settling Monsieur Porthos's horse, as well as his master's. When we observed this to him, he told us all to trouble ourselves about our own business, as his horse belonged to him. We also informed Monsieur Porthos of what was going on, but he told us we were scoundrels to doubt a gentleman's word, and that as he had said the horse was his, it must be so. That's Porthos all over, murmured D'Artagnan. Then, continued the host, I replied that as from the moment we seemed not likely to come to a good understanding with respect to payment, I hoped that he would have at least the kindness to grant a favor of his custom to my brother host of the Golden Eagle. But Monsieur Porthos replied that, my house being the best, he should remain where he was. This reply was too flattering to allow me to insist on his departure. I confined myself then to begging him to give up his chamber, which is the handsomest in the hotel, and to be satisfied with a pretty little room on the 3rd floor. But to this Monsieur Porthos replied that as he every moment expected his mistress, who was one of the greatest ladies in the court, I might easily comprehend that the chamber he did me the honor to occupy in my house was itself very mean for the visit of such a personage. Nevertheless, while acknowledging the truth of what he said, I thought proper to insist, but without even giving himself the trouble to enter into any discussion with me. He took one of his pistols, laid it on his table, day and night, and said that at the first word that should be spoken to him about removing, either within the house or out of it, he would blow out the brains of the person who should be so imprudent as to meddle with a matter which only concerned himself. Since that time, monsieur, nobody entered his chamber but his servant. What? Mouston is he? Then? Oh, yes, monsieur. 5 days after your departure, he came back, and in a very bad condition, too. It appears that he had met with disagreeableness, likewise, on his journey. Unfortunately, he is more nimble than his master, so that for the sake of his master, he puts us all under his feet, and as he thinks we might refuse what he asks for, he takes all he wants without asking at all. The fact is, said D'Artagnan, I have always observed a great degree of intelligence and devotedness in Mouston. That is possible, monsieur, but suppose I should happen to be brought in contact, even 4 times a year, with such intelligence and devotedness, why, I should be a ruined man. No, for Porthos will pay you. Hum, said the host in a doubtful tone. The favorite of a great lady will not be allowed to be inconvenienced for such a paltry sum as he owes you. If I dare say what I believe on that head. What you believe. I ought rather to say what I know. What you know. And even what I am sure of. And of what are you so sure? I would say that I know this great lady. You? Yes, I. And how do you know her? Oh, monsieur, if I could believe I might trust in your discretion. Speak, by the word of a gentleman, you shall have no cause to repent of your confidence. Well, monsieur, you understand that uneasiness makes us do many things. What have you done? Oh, nothing which was not right in the character of a creditor. Well, Monsieur Porthos gave us a note for his duchess, ordering us to put it in the post. This was before his servant came. As he could not leave his chamber, it was necessary to charge us with this commission. And then, instead of putting the letter in the post, which is never safe, I took advantage of the journey of one of my lads to Paris, and ordered him to convey the letter to this duchess himself. This was fulfilling the intentions of Monsieur Porthos, who had desired us to be so careful of this letter, was it not? Nearly so. Well, monsieur, do you know who this great lady is? No, I have heard Porthos speak of her. That's all. Do you know who this pretended duchess is? I repeat to you, I don't know her. Why, she is the old wife of a procurator of the Châtelet, monsieur, named Madame Coquenard, who, although she is at least 50, still gives herself jealous airs. It struck me as very odd that a princess should live in the Rue Auxiliary Hours. But how do you know all this? Because she flew into a great passion on receiving the letter, saying that Monsieur Porthos was a weathercock, and that she was sure it was for some woman he had received this wound. Has he been wounded? Then? Oh, good Lord, what have I said? You said that Porthos had received a sword cut. Yes, but he has forbidden me so strictly to say so. And why so? Zounds, monsieur, because he had boasted that he would perforate the stranger with whom you left him in dispute, whereas the stranger, on the contrary, in spite of all his rhodomontades, quickly threw him on his back. As Monsieur Porthos is a very boastful man, he insists that nobody shall know he has received this wound except the duchess, whom he endeavored to interest by an account of his adventure. It is a wound that confines him to his bed. Ah, and a masterstroke, too, I assure you. Your friend so must stick tight to his body. Were you there? Then, monsieur, I followed them from curiosity, so that I saw the combat without the combatant seeing me. And what took place? Oh, the affair was not long, I assure you. They placed themselves on guard. The stranger made a feint and a lunge, and that so rapidly that when Monsieur Porthos came to the parade, he had already 3 inches of steel in his breast. He immediately fell backward. The stranger placed the point of his sword at his throat, and Monsieur Porthos, finding himself at the mercy of his adversary, acknowledged himself conquered. Upon which the stranger asked his name, and learning that it was Porthos and not D'Artagnan, he assisted him to rise, brought him back to the hotel, mounted his horse, and disappeared. So it was with Monsieur d'Artagnan the stranger meant a quarrel. It appears so. And do you know what has become of him? No, I never saw him until that moment, and have not seen him since. Very well, I know all that I wish to know. Porthos's chamber is, you say, on the first story, number 1. Yes, monsieur, the handsomest in the inn, a chamber that I could have let 10 times over. Bow! Be satisfied, said D'Artagnan, laughing. Porthos will pay you with the money of the Duchess Coquenard. Oh, monsieur, procurator's wife or duchess, if she will but loosen her purse strings, it will be all the same. But she positively answered that she was tired of the exigencies and infidelities of Monsieur Porthos, and that she would not send him a denier. And did you convey this answer to your guest? We took good care not to do that. He would have found in what fashion we had executed his commission. So that he still expects his money. Oh, Lord, yes, monsieur. Yesterday he wrote again, but it was his servant who this time put the letter in the post. Do you say the procurator's wife is old and ugly? 50 at least, monsieur, and not at all handsome, according to Pat Hord's account. In that case, you may be quite at ease. She will soon be softened. Besides, Porthos cannot owe you much. How? Not much. 20 good pistoles, already, without reckoning the doctor. He denies himself nothing. It may easily be seen he has been accustomed to live well. Never mind. If his mistress abandons him, he will find friends. I will answer for it. So, my dear host, be not uneasy, and continue to take all the care of him that his situation requires. Monsieur has promised me not to open his mouth about the procurator's wife, and not to say a word of the wound. That's agreed. You have my word. Oh, he would kill me. Don't be afraid. He is not so much of a devil as he appears. Saying these words, D'Artagnan went upstairs, leaving his host a little better satisfied with respect to two things in which he appeared to be very much interested: his debt and his life. At the top of the stairs, upon the most conspicuous door of the corridor, was traced in black ink a gigantic number 1. D'Artagnan knocked, and upon the bidding to come in which came from inside, he entered the chamber. Porthos was in bed, and was playing a game at lansquenet with Mouston, to keep his hand in, while a spit loaded with partridges was turning before the fire, and on each side of a large chimney-piece, over 2 chafing dishes, were boiling 2 stewpans, from which exhaled a double odor of rabbit and fish stews, rejoicing to the smell. In addition to this, he perceived that the top of a wardrobe and the marble of a commode were covered with empty bottles. At the sight of his friend, Porthos uttered a loud cry of joy, and Mouston, rising respectfully, yielded his place to him, and went to give an eye to the 2 stewpans, of which he appeared to have a particular inspection. "Ah, pardieu, is that you?" said Porthos to D'Artagnan. "You are right welcome. Excuse my not coming to meet you. But," added he, looking at D'Artagnan with a certain degree of uneasiness, "you know what has happened to me?" "No. Has the host told you nothing, then?" "I asked after you, and came up as soon as I could." Porthos seemed to breathe more freely. "And what has happened to you, my dear Porthos?" continued D'Artagnan. "Why, on making a thrust at my adversary, whom I had already hit 3 times, and whom I meant to finish with a 4th, I put my foot on a stone, slipped, and strained my knee." "Truly." "Honor, luckily for the rascal, for I should have left him dead on the spot, I assure you." "And what has become of him?" "Oh, I don't know. He had enough, and set off without waiting for the rest. But you, my dear D'Artagnan, what has happened to you?" "So that the strain of the knee," continued D'Artagnan, "my dear Porthos, keeps you in bed." "My God, that's all. I shall be about again in a few days." "Why did you not have yourself conveyed to Paris? You must be cruelly bored here." "That was my intention. But, my dear friend, I have one thing to confess to you." "What's that?" "It is that as I was cruelly bored, as you say, and as I had the 75 pistoles in my pocket, which you had distributed to me, in order to amuse myself, I invited a gentleman who was traveling this way to walk up, and proposed a cast of dice. He accepted my challenge, and, my faith, my 75 pistoles passed from my pocket to his, without reckoning my horse, which he won into the bargain. But you, my dear D'Artagnan, what can you expect? My dear Porthos, a man is not privileged in all ways," said D'Artagnan. "You know the proverb, unlucky at play, lucky in love. You are too fortunate in your love for play not to take its revenge. What consequence can the reverses of fortune be to you? Have you not, happy rogue that you are, have you not your Duchess, who cannot fail to come to your aid?" "Well, you see, my dear D'Artagnan, with what ill luck I play," replied Porthos, with the most careless air in the world. "I wrote to her to send me 50 louis or so, of which I stood absolutely in need on account of my accident. Well, well, she must be at a country seat, for she has not answered me." "Truly?" "No. So I yesterday addressed another epistle to her, still more pressing than the first. "But you are here, my dear fellow. Let us speak of you. I confess I began to be very uneasy on your account. But your host behaves very well toward you, as it appears, my dear Porthos," said D'Artagnan, directing the sick man's attention to the full stewpans and the empty bottles. So, replied Porthos. "Only 3 or 4 days ago the impertinent jackanapes gave me his bill, and I was forced to turn both him and his bill out of the door, so that I am here something in the fashion of a conqueror, holding my position, as it were, my conquest. So you see, being in constant fear of being forced from that position, I am armed to the teeth." "And yet," said D'Artagnan, laughing, "it appears to me that from time to time you must make sorties." And he again pointed to the bottles and the stewpans. "Not I, unfortunately," said Porthos. "This miserable strain confines me to my bed, but Mouston forages and brings in provisions. Friend Mouston, you see that we have a reinforcement, and we must have an increase of supplies." "Mouston," said D'Artagnan, "you must render me a service." "What, monsieur?" "You must give your recipe to Planchet. I may be besieged in my tone, and I shall not be sorry for him to be able to let me enjoy the same advantages with which you gratify your master." "Lord, monsieur, there is nothing more easy," said Mouston with a modest air. "One only needs to be sharp, that's all. I was brought up in the country, and my father in his leisure time was something of a poacher." "And what did he do the rest of his time?" "Monsieur, he carried on a trade which I have always thought satisfactory." "Which?" "As it was a time of war between the Catholics and the Huguenots, and as he saw the Catholics exterminate the Huguenots and the Huguenots exterminate the Catholics, all in the name of religion, he adopted a mixed belief which permitted him to be sometimes Catholic, sometimes a Huguenot. Now, he was accustomed to walk with his fowling piece on his shoulder, behind the hedges which border the roads, and when he saw a Catholic coming alone, the Protestant religion immediately prevailed in his mind. He lowered his gun in the direction of the traveler. Then, when he was within 10 paces of him, he commenced a conversation which almost always ended by the traveler's abandoning his purse to save his life. It goes without saying that when he saw a Huguenot coming, he felt himself filled with such ardent Catholic zeal that he could not understand how, a quarter of an hour before, he had been able to have any doubts upon the superiority of our holy religion. For my part, monsieur, I am Catholic, my father, faithful to his principles, having made my elder brother a Huguenot." "And what was the end of this worthy man?" asked D'Artagnan. "Oh, of the most unfortunate kind, monsieur. One day he was surprised in a lonely road between a Huguenot and a Catholic, with both of whom he had before had business, and who both knew him again. So they united against him and hanged him on a tree. Then they came and boasted of their fine exploit in the cabaret of the next village, where my brother and I were drinking." "And what did you do?" said D'Artagnan. "We let them tell their story out," replied Mouston. "Then, as in leaving the cabaret they took different directions, my brother went and hid himself on the road of the Catholic, and I on that of the Huguenot. 2 hours after, all was over. We had done the business of both, admiring the foresight of our poor father, who had taken the precaution to bring each of us up in a different religion. Well, I must allow, as you say, your father was a very intelligent fellow, and you say in his leisure moments the worthy man was a poacher." "Yes, monsieur, and it was he who taught me to lay a snare and ground a line. The consequence is that when I saw our labors, which did not at all suit 2 such delicate stomachs as ours, I had recourse to a little of my old trade. While walking near the wood of Monsieur le Prince, I laid a few snares in the runs, and while reclining on the banks of His Highness's pieces of water, I slip a few lines into his fish ponds. So that now, thanks be to God, we do not want, as monsieur can testify, for partridges, rabbits, carp or eels, all light, wholesome food, suitable for the sick." "But the wine," said D'Artagnan. "Who furnishes the wine?" "Your host." "That is to say, yes and no." "How yes and no?" "He furnishes it, it is true, but he does not know that he has that honor." "Explain yourself," Mouston, your conversation is full of instructive things. That is it, monsieur. It has so chanced that I met with a Spaniard in my peregrinations who had seen many countries, and among them the New World. What connection can the New World have with the bottles which are on the commode and the wardrobe? Patience, monsieur. Everything will come in its turn. This Spaniard had in his service a lackey who had accompanied him in his voyage to Mexico. This lackey was my compatriot, and we became the more intimate from there being many resemblances of character between us. We loved sporting of all kinds better than anything, so that he related to me how in the plains of the Pampas the natives hunt the tiger and the wild bull with simple running nooses which they throw to a distance of 20 or 30 paces the end of a cord with such nicety. But in face of the proof I was obliged to acknowledge the truth of the recital. My friend placed a bottle at the distance of 30 paces, and at each cast he caught the neck of the bottle in his running noose. I practiced this exercise, and as nature has endowed me with some faculties, at this day I can throw the lasso with any man in the world. Well, do you understand, monsieur? Our host is a well-furnished cellar, the key of which never leaves him. Only this cellar has a ventilating hole. Now through this ventilating hole I throw my lasso, and as I now know in which part of the cellar is the best wine, that's my point for sport. You see, monsieur, what the New World has to do with the bottles which are on the commode and the wardrobe. Now, will you taste our wine, and without prejudice say what you think of it? Thank you, my friend, thank you. Unfortunately, I have just breakfasted. Well, said Porthos, arrange the table, Mouston, and while we breakfast, D'Artagnan will relate to us what has happened to him during the 10 days since he left us. Willingly, said D'Artagnan. While Porthos and Mouston were breakfasting, with the appetites of convalescence and with that brotherly cordiality which unites men in misfortune, D'Artagnan related how Aramis, being wounded, was obliged to stop at Crèvecoeur, how he had left Athos fighting at Amiens with the men who accused him of being a coiner, and how he, D'Artagnan, had been forced to run the Comte de Wardes through the body in order to reach England. But there the confidence of D'Artagnan stopped. He only added that on his return from Great Britain he had brought back 4 magnificent horses, one for himself and one for each of his companions. Then he informed Porthos that the one intended for him was already installed in the stable of the tavern. At this moment Planchet entered, to inform his master that the horses were sufficiently refreshed and that it would be possible to sleep at Clermont. As D'Artagnan was tolerably reassured with regard to Porthos, and as he was anxious to obtain news of his 2 other friends, he held out his hand to the wounded man, and told him he was about to resume his route in order to continue his researches. For the rest, as he reckoned upon returning by the same route in 7 or 8 days, if Porthos was still at the Great St. Martin, he would call for him on his way. Porthos replied that in all probability his sprain would not permit him to depart yet a while. Besides, it was necessary he should stay at Chantilly to wait for the answer from his duchess. D'Artagnan wished that answer might be prompt and favorable, and having again recommended Porthos to the care of Mouston, and paid his bill to the host, he resumed his route with Planchet, already relieved of one of his led horses. Chapter 26. Aramis and his thesis. D'Artagnan had said nothing to Porthos of his wound or of his procurator's wife. Our Benet was a prudent lad, however young he might be. Consequently, he had appeared to believe all that the vainglorious musketeer had told him, convinced that no friendship will hold out against a surprise secret. Besides, we feel always a sort of mental superiority over those whose lives were no better than they suppose. In his projects of intrigue for the future, and determined as he was to make his 3 friends the instruments of his fortune, D'Artagnan was not sorry at getting into his grasp beforehand the invisible strings by which he reckoned upon moving them. And yet, as he journeyed along, a profound sadness weighed upon his heart. He thought of that young and pretty Amie Bonacieux who was to have paid him the price of his devotedness. But let us hasten to say that this sadness possessed the young man less from the regret of the happiness he had missed than from the fear he entertained that some serious misfortune had befallen the poor woman. For himself, he had no doubt she was a victim of the cardinal's vengeance, and, as was well known, the vengeance of his eminence was terrible. How he had found grace in the eyes of the minister, he did not know, but without doubt M. de Cavois would have revealed this to him if the captain of the guards had found him at home. Nothing makes time pass more quickly or more shortens a journey than a thought which absorbs in itself all the faculties of the organization of him who thinks. External existence then resembles a sleep of which this thought is a dream. By its influence, time has no longer measure, space has no longer distance. We depart from one place and arrive at another. That is all of the interval past. Nothing remains in the memory but a vague mist in which 1,000 confused images of trees, mountains, and landscapes are lost. It was as a prey to this hallucination that D'Artagnan traveled, at whatever pace his horse pleased, the 6 or 8 leagues that separated Chantilly from Crèvecoeur, without his being able to remember on his arrival in the village any of the things he had passed or met with on the road. They only his memory returned to him. He shook his head, perceived the cabaret at which he had left Aramis, and putting his horse to the trot, he shortly pulled up at the door. This time it was not a host but a hostess who received him. D'Artagnan was a physiognomist. His eye took in at a glance the plump, cheerful countenance of the mistress of the place, and he at once perceived there was no occasion for dissembling with her, or fearing anything from one blessed with such a joyous physiognomy. "My good dame," asked D'Artagnan, "can you tell me what has become of one of my friends, whom we were obliged to leave here about a dozen days ago?" "A handsome young man, 3 or 24 years old, mild, amiable, and well-made." "That is he, wounded in the shoulder." "Just so. Well, monsieur, he is still here." "Ah, pardieu, my dear dame," said D'Artagnan, springing from his horse and throwing the bridle to Planchet. "You restore me to life. Where is this dear Aramis? Let me embrace him. I am in a hurry to see him again." "Pardon, monsieur, but I doubt whether he can see you at this moment." "Why so? Has he a lady with him?" "Jesus, what do you mean by that? Poor lad! No, monsieur, he has not a lady with him." "With whom is he, then?" "With the curate of Montdidier and the superior of the Jesuits of Amiens." "Good heavens!" cried D'Artagnan. "Is the poor fellow worse, then?" "No, monsieur, quite the contrary, but after his illness grace touched him, and he determined to take orders." "That's it," said D'Artagnan. "I had forgotten that he was only a musketeer for a time. Monsieur still insists upon seeing him." "More than ever." "Well, monsieur has only to take the right-hand staircase in the courtyard and knock at number 5 on the second floor." D'Artagnan walked quickly in the direction indicated, and found one of those exterior staircases that are still to be seen in the yards of our old-fashioned taverns. But there was no getting at the place of sojourn of the future abbé. The defiles of the chamber of Aramis were as well guarded as the gardens of Armida. Bazin was stationed in the corridor, and barred his passage with the more intrepidity that, after many years of trial, Bazin found himself near a result of which he had ever been ambitious. In fact, the dream of poor Bazin had always been to serve a churchman, and he awaited with impatience the moment, always in the future, when Aramis would throw aside the uniform and assume the cassock. The daily renewed promise of the young man that the moment would not long be delayed had alone kept him in the service of a musketeer, a service in which, he said, his soul was in constant jeopardy. Bazin was then at the height of joy. In all probability, this time his master would not retract. The union of physical pain with moral uneasiness had produced the effect so long desired. Aramis, suffering at once in body and mind, had at length fixed his eyes and his thoughts upon religion, and he had considered as a warning from heaven the double accident which had happened to him. That is to say, the sudden disappearance of his mistress and the wound in his shoulder. It may be easily understood that in the present disposition of his master nothing could be more disagreeable to Bazin than the arrival of D'Artagnan, which might cast his master back again into that vortex of mundane affairs which had so long carried him away. He resolved, then, to defend the door bravely, and as, betrayed by the mistress of the inn, he could not say that Aramis was absent, he endeavored to prove to the newcomer that it would be the height of indiscretion to disturb his master in his pious conference, which had commenced with the morning and would not, as Bazin said, terminate before night. But D'Artagnan took very little heed of the eloquent discourse of M. Bazin, and as he had no desire to support a polemic discussion with his friend's valet, he simply moved him out of the way with one hand, and with the other turned the handle of the door of number 5. The door opened, and D'Artagnan went into the chamber. Aramis, in a black gown, his head enveloped in a sort of round flat cap, not much unlike a calotte, was seated before an oblong table, covered with rolls of paper and enormous volumes in folio. At his right hand was placed the superior of the Jesuits, and on his left the curate of Montdidier. The curtains were half drawn, and only admitted the mysterious light calculated for beatific reveries. All the mundane objects that generally strike the eye on entering the room of a young man, particularly when that young man is a musketeer, had disappeared as if by enchantment, and for fear, no doubt, that the sight of them might bring his master back to ideas of this world, Bazin had laid his hands upon sword, pistols, plumed hat, and embroideries and laces of all kinds and sorts. In their stead, D'Artagnan thought he perceived in an obscure corner a discipline cord suspended from a nail in the wall. At the noise made by D'Artagnan in entering, Aramis lifted up his head and beheld his friend, but to the great astonishment of the young man, the sight of him did not produce much effect upon the musketeer, so completely was his mind detached from the things of this world. "Good day, dear D'Artagnan," said Aramis. "Believe me, I am glad to see you." "So am I delighted to see you," said D'Artagnan, "although I am not yet sure that it is Aramis I am speaking to." To himself, my friend, to himself. But what makes you doubt it? I was afraid I had made a mistake in the chamber, and that I had found my way into the apartment of some churchman. Then another error seized me on seeing you in company with these gentlemen. I was afraid you were dangerously ill. The two men in black, who guessed D'Artagnan's meaning, darted at him a glance which might have been thought threatening, but D'Artagnan took no heed of it. "I disturb you, perhaps, my dear Aramis," continued D'Artagnan, "for by what I see, I am led to believe that you are confessing to these gentlemen." Aramis colored imperceptibly. "You disturb me? Oh, quite the contrary. Dear friend, I swear, and as a proof of what I say, permit me to declare I am rejoiced to see you safe and sound." "Aye, he'll come round," thought D'Artagnan. "That's not bad. This gentleman, who is my friend, has just escaped from a serious danger," continued Aramis, with unction, pointing to D'Artagnan with his hand, and addressing the two ecclesiastics. "Praise God, monsieur," replied they, bowing together. "I have not failed to do so, your reverences," replied the young man, returning their salutation. "You arrive in good time, dear D'Artagnan," said Aramis, "and by taking part in our discussion may assist us with your intelligence. Monsieur the Principal of Amiens, Monsieur the Curate of Montdidier, and I are arguing certain theological questions in which we have been much interested. I shall be delighted to have your opinion." "The opinion of a swordsman can have very little weight," replied D'Artagnan, who began to be uneasy at the turn things were taking, "and you had better be satisfied, believe me, with a knowledge of these gentlemen." The two men in black bowed in their turn. "On the contrary," replied Aramis, "your opinion will be very valuable. The question is this: Monsieur the Principal thinks that my thesis ought to be dogmatic and didactic." "Your thesis? Are you then making a thesis?" "Without doubt," replied the Jesuit. "In the examination which precedes ordination, a thesis is always a requisite." "Ordination!" cried D'Artagnan, who could not believe what the hostess and Bazin had successively told him, and he gazed, half stupefied, upon the three persons before him. "Now," continued Aramis, taking the same graceful position in his easy chair that he would have assumed in bed, and complacently examining his hand, which was as white and plump as that of a woman, and which he held in the air to cause the blood to descend. "Now, as you have heard, D'Artagnan, Monsieur the Principal is desirous that my thesis should be dogmatic, while I, for my part, would rather it should be ideal. This is the reason why Monsieur the Principal has proposed to me the following subject, which has not yet been treated upon, and in which I perceive there is matter for magnificent elaboration. Utrec manus in benedicendo clericis inferioribus necessaria estimated." D'Artagnan, whose erudition we are well acquainted with, evinced no more interest on hearing this quotation than he had at that of M. de Treville in allusion to the gifts he pretended that D'Artagnan had received from the Duke of Buckingham. "Which means," resumed Aramis, "that he might perfectly understand. The two hands are indispensable for priests of the inferior orders when they bestow the benediction. An admirable subject, cried the Jesuit. Admirable and dogmatic, repeated the curate, who, about as strong as D'Artagnan with respect to Latin, carefully watched the Jesuit in order to keep step with him, and repeated his words like an echo. As to D'Artagnan, he remained perfectly insensible to the enthusiasm of the two men in black. Yes, admirable, proces admirabile, continued Aramis, but which requires a profound study of both the Scriptures and the Fathers. Now, I have confessed to these learned ecclesiastics, and that in all humility, that the duties of mounting guard in the service of the king have caused me to neglect study a little. I should find myself, therefore, more at my ease, facilius nadens, in a subject of my own choice, which would be to these hard theological questions what morals are to metaphysics in philosophy. D'Artagnan began to be tired, and so did the curate. See what an exordium, cried the Jesuit. Exordium, repeated the curate, for the sake of saying something. Quemit modum intercellorum immensitatum. Aramis cast a glance upon D'Artagnan to see what effect all this produced, and found his friend gaping enough to split his jaws. Let us speak French. My father, said he to the Jesuit, Monsieur D'Artagnan will enjoy our conversation better. Yes, replied D'Artagnan. I am fatigued with reading, and all this Latin confuses me. Certainly, replied the Jesuit, a little put out, while the curate, greatly delighted, turned upon D'Artagnan a look full of gratitude. Well, let us see what is to be derived from this gloss. Moses, the servant of God, he was but servant. Please understand, Moses blessed with the hands. He held out both his arms while the Hebrews beat their enemies, and then he blessed them with his two hands. Besides, what does the gospel say? Imponite manus, and not manum, place the hands, not the hand. Place the hands, repeated the curate, with a gesture. St. Peter, on the contrary, of whom the popes are the successors, continued the Jesuit. Porridge digitos, present the fingers. Are you there now? Certes, replied Aramis, in a pleased tone, but the thing is subtle. The fingers, resumed the Jesuit. St. Peter blessed with the fingers. The Pope therefore blesses with the fingers. And with how many fingers does he bless? With 3 fingers, to be sure, one for the Father, one for the Son, and one for the Holy Ghost. All cross themselves. D'Artagnan thought it was proper to follow this example. The Pope is the successor of St. Peter, and represents the 3 divine powers. The rest, ordines inferius, of the ecclesiastical hierarchy bless in the name of the holy archangels and angels. The most humble clerks, such as our deacons and sacristans, bless with holy water sprinklers, which resemble an infinite number of blessing fingers. There is the subject simplified. Argumentum omni denudatum ornamento. I could make of that subject 2 volumes the size of this, continued the Jesuit, and in his enthusiasm he struck a St. Chrysostom in folio, which made the table bend beneath its weight. D'Artagnan trembled. Certes, said Aramis, I do justice to the beauties of this thesis, but at the same time I perceive it will be overwhelming for me. I had chosen this text. Tell me, dear D'Artagnan, if it is not to your taste, non inutilis desiderium in oblation, that is, a little regret is not unsuitable in an offering to the Lord. Stop there, cried the Jesuit, for that thesis touches closely upon heresy. There is a proposition almost like in the Augustinus of the Heresiarch Jansenius, whose book will sooner or later be burned by the hands of the executioner. Take care, my young friend. You are inclining toward false doctrines. My young friend, you will be lost. You will be lost, said the curate, shaking his head sorrowfully. You approach that famous point of free will which is a mortal rock. You face the insinuations of the Pelagians and the semi-Pelagians. But, my reverend, replied Aramis, a little amazed by the shower of arguments that poured upon his head. How will you prove, continued the Jesuit, without allowing him time to speak, that we ought to regret the world when we offer ourselves to God? Listen to this dilemma. God is God, and the world is the devil. To regret the world is to regret the devil. That is my conclusion. "And that is mine also," said the curate. "But, for heaven's sake," resumed Aramis. "Desiderus diabolum, unhappy man," cried the Jesuit. "He regrets the devil." "Ah, my young friend," added the curate, groaning, "do not regret the devil, I implore you." D'Artagnan felt himself bewildered. It seemed to him as though he were in a madhouse, and was becoming as mad as those he saw. He was, however, forced to hold his tongue from not comprehending half the language they employed. "But listen to me, then," resumed Aramis with politeness mingled with a little impatience. "I do not say I regret. No, I will never pronounce its sentence, which would not be orthodox." The Jesuit raised his hands toward heaven, and the curate did the same. "No, but pray grant me that it is acting with an ill grace to offer to the Lord only that with which we are perfectly disgusted. Don't you think so, D'Artagnan?" "I think so, indeed," cried he. The Jesuit and the curate quite started from their chairs. "This is the point of departure. It is a syllogism. The world is not wanting in attractions. I quit the world, then I make a sacrifice. Now, the Scripture says positively, make a sacrifice unto the Lord." "That is true," said his antagonists. "And then," said Aramis, pinching his ear to make it red, as he rubbed his hands to make them white, "and then I made a certain rondo upon it last year, which I showed to Monsieur Voiture, and that great man paid me 1,000 compliments." "A rondo," said the Jesuit, disdainfully. "A rondo," said the curate, mechanically. Repeat it," cried D'Artagnan. "It will make a little change." "Not so, for it is religious," replied Aramis. "It is theology in verse." "The devil," said D'Artagnan. "Here it is," said Aramis, with a little look of diffidence, which, however, was not exempt from a shade of hypocrisy. "Vous qui pleurez you en passez plein de charmes, et qui traînez des vos infortunes, choose vos malheurs vers termines, quand dieu so vous offrires vos larmes, vous qui pleurez." You who weep for pleasures fled, while dragging on a life of K, all your woes will melt in A, if to God your tears are shed, you who weep. D'Artagnan and the curate appeared pleased. The Jesuit persisted in his opinion. "Beware of a profane taste in your theological style. What says Augustine on this subject? Severus et clericorum verbo." "Yes, let the sermon be clear," said the curate. "Now," hastily interrupted the Jesuit, on seeing that his acolyte was going astray, "now your thesis would please the ladies. It would have the success of one of Monsieur Patru's pleadings." "Please God," cried Aramis, transported. "There it is," cried the Jesuit. "The world still speaks within you in a loud voice, altissima voce. You follow the world, my young friend, and I tremble lest grace prove not efficacious. Be satisfied, my reverend father, I can answer for myself. Mundane presumption. I know myself. Father, my resolution is irrevocable." "Then you persist in continuing that thesis." "I feel myself called upon to treat that and no other. I will see about the continuation of it, and tomorrow I hope you will be satisfied with the corrections I shall have made in consequence of your advice." "Work slowly," said the curate. "We leave you in an excellent tone of mind." "Yes, the ground is all sown," said the Jesuit, "and we have not to fear that one portion of the seed may have fallen upon stone, another upon the highway, or that the birds of heaven have eaten the rest. Aves coeli comederint illum." "Plague stifle you in your Latin," said D'Artagnan, who began to feel all his patience exhausted. "Farewell, my son," said the curate, "till tomorrow." "Till tomorrow, rash youth," said the Jesuit. "You promised to become one of the lights of the church. Heaven grant that this light prove not a devouring fire." D'Artagnan, who for an hour past had been gnawing his nails with impatience, was beginning to attack the quick. The two men in black robes bowed to Aramis and D'Artagnan and advanced toward the door. Bazin, who had been standing listening to all the controversy with a pious jubilation, sprang toward them, took the breviary of the curate and the missal of the Jesuit, and walked respectfully before them to clear their way. Aramis conducted them to the foot of the stairs, and then immediately came up again to D'Artagnan, whose senses were still in a state of confusion. When left alone, the two friends at first kept an embarrassed silence. It, however, became necessary for one of them to break it first, and as D'Artagnan appeared determined to leave that honor to his companion, Aramis said, "You see that I am returned to my fundamental ideas. Yes, efficacious grace has touched you, as that gentleman said just now. Oh, these plans of retreat have been formed for a long time. You have often heard me speak of them. Have you not, my friend?" "Yes, but I confess I always thought you jested." "With such things? Oh, D'Artagnan, the devil, why, people jest with death. And people are wrong, D'Artagnan, for death is a door which leads to perdition or to salvation." "Granted. But if you please, let us not theologize. Aramis, you must have had enough for today. As for me, I have almost forgotten the little Latin I have ever known. Then I confess to you that I have eaten nothing since 10 o'clock this morning, and I am devilish hungry. We will dine directly, my friend. Only you must please to remember that this is Friday. Now, on such a day I can neither eat flesh nor see it eaten. If you can be satisfied with my dinner, it consists of cooked tetragones and fruits." "What do you mean by tetragones?" asked D'Artagnan uneasily. "I mean spinach," replied Aramis. "But on your account I will add some eggs, and that is a serious infraction of the rule, for eggs are meat, since they engender chickens. This feast is not very succulent, but never mind, I will put up with it for the sake of remaining with you." "I am grateful to you for the sacrifice," said Aramis, "but if your body be not greatly benefited by it, be assured your soul will." "And so, Aramis, you are decidedly going into the church? What will our two friends say? What will Monsieur de Treville say? They will treat you as a deserter, I warn you." "I do not enter the church. I re-enter it. I deserted the church of the world, for you know that I forced myself when I became a musketeer." I know nothing about it." "You don't know I quit the seminary." "Not at all. This is my story. Then, besides, the scriptures say, 'Confess yourselves to one another,' and I confess to you, D'Artagnan. And I give you absolution beforehand. You see I am a good sort of a man. Do not jest about holy things, my friend." "Go on, then I listen." "I had been at the seminary from 9 years old. In 3 days I should have been 20. I was about to become an abbé, and all was arranged. One evening I went, according to custom, to a house which I frequented with much pleasure. When one is young, what can be expected? One is weak. An officer who saw me, with a jealous eye, reading the lives of the saints to the mistress of the house, entered suddenly and without being announced. That evening I had translated an episode of Judith, and had just communicated my verses to the lady, who gave me all sorts of compliments, and leaning on my shoulder, was reading them a second time with me. Her pose, which I must admit was rather free, wounded this officer. He said nothing, but when I went out he followed, and quickly came up with me. 'Monsieur the Abbé,' said he, 'do you like blows with a cane?' 'I cannot say, monsieur,' answered I. 'No one has ever dared to give me any.' 'Well, listen to me, then, Monsieur the Abbé. If you venture again into the house in which I have met you this evening, I will day it myself.' I really think I must have been frightened. I became very pale. I felt my legs fail me. I sought for a reply, but could find none. I was silent. The officer waited for his reply, and seeing it so long coming, he burst into a laugh, turned upon his heel, and re-entered the house. I returned to the seminary. I am a gentleman born, and my blood is warm, as you may have remarked, my dear D'Artagnan. The insult was terrible, and although unknown to the rest of the world, I felt it live and fester at the bottom of my heart. I informed my superiors that I did not feel myself sufficiently prepared for ordination, and at my request the ceremony was postponed for a year. I sought out the best fencing master in Paris. I made an agreement with him to take a lesson every day, and every day for a year I took that lesson. Then, On the anniversary of the day on which I had been insulted, I hung my cassock on a peg, assumed the costume of a cavalier, and went to a ball given by a lady friend of mine, and to which I knew my man was invited. It was in the Rue des Francs-Bourgeois, close to La Force. As I expected, my officer was there. I went up to him as he was singing a love ditty and looking tenderly at a lady, and interrupted him exactly in the middle of the second couplet. "Monsieur," said I, "does it still displease you that I should frequent a certain house of La Rue Payenne? And would you still cane me if I took it into my head to disobey you?" The officer looked at me with astonishment, and then said, "What is your business with me, monsieur? I do not know you." "I am," said I, "the little abbé who reads Lives of the Saints, and translates Judith into verse." "Ah, I recollect now," said the officer, in a jeering tone. "Well, what do you want with me?" "I want you to spare time to take a walk with me. Tomorrow morning, if you like, with the greatest pleasure." "No, not tomorrow morning, if you please, but immediately, if you absolutely insist." "I do insist upon it." "Come, then, ladies," said the officer, "do not disturb yourselves. Allow me time just to kill this gentleman, and I will return and finish the last couplet." We went out. I took him to the Rue Payenne, to exactly the same spot where, a year before, at the very same hour, he had paid me the compliment I have related to you. It was a superb moonlight night. We immediately drew, and at the first pass I laid him stock dead. "The devil!" cried D'Artagnan. "Now," continued Aramis, as the ladies did not see the singer come back, and as he was found in the Rue Payenne with a great sword wound through his body, it was supposed that I had accommodated him thus, and the matter created some scandal which obliged me to renounce the cassock for a time. Athos, whose acquaintance I made about that period, and Porthos, who had in addition to my lessons taught me some effective tricks of fence, prevailed upon me to solicit the uniform of a musketeer. The king entertained great regard for my father, who had fallen at the siege of Arras, and the uniform was granted. You may understand that the moment has come for me to re-enter the bosom of the church. And why today, rather than yesterday or tomorrow? What has happened to you today to raise all these melancholy ideas? This wound, my dear D'Artagnan, has been a warning to me from heaven. This wound? Bah! It is now nearly healed, and I am sure it is not that which gives you the most pain. "What, then," said Aramis, blushing, "you have one at heart, Aramis, one deeper and more painful, a wound made by a woman." The eye of Aramis kindled in spite of himself. "Ah," said he, dissembling his emotion under feigned carelessness, "do not talk of such things, and suffer love pains? Vanitas vanitatum. According to your idea, then, my brain is turned. And for whom? For some grisette, some chambermaid with whom I have trifled in some garrison? Fie! Pardon, my dear Aramis, but I thought you carried your eyes higher." "Higher? And who am I to nourish such ambition? A poor musketeer, a beggar, an unknown, who hates slavery, and finds himself ill-placed in the world." "Aramis, Aramis," cried D'Artagnan, looking at his friend with an air of doubt. "Dust I am, and to dust I return. Life is full of humiliations and sorrows," continued he, becoming still more melancholy. "All the ties which attach him to life break in the hand of man, particularly the golden ties." "Oh, my dear D'Artagnan," resumed Aramis, giving to his voice a slight tone of bitterness, "trust me, conceal your wounds when you have any. Silence is the last joy of the unhappy. Beware of giving anyone the clue to your griefs. The curious suck our tears as flies suck the blood of a wounded heart." "Alas, my dear Aramis," said D'Artagnan, in his turn heaving a profound sigh, "that is my story you are relating." "How?" "Yes, a woman whom I love, whom I adore, has just been torn from me by force. I do not know where she is or whither they have conducted her. She is perhaps a prisoner. She is perhaps dead." "Yes, but you have at least this consolation, that you can say to yourself she has not quit you voluntarily, that if you learn no news of her, it is because all communication with you is interdicted. while well, nothing, replied Aramis. Nothing. So you renounce a world, then, forever. That is a settled thing, a resolution registered. Forever? You are my friend today. Tomorrow you will be no more to me than a shadow, or rather, even, you will no longer exist. As for the world, it is a sepulchre and nothing else. The devil, all this is very sad which you tell me. What will you? My vocation commands me, it carries me away. D'Artagnan smiled, but made no answer. Aramis continued, and yet, while I do belong to the earth, I wish to speak of you, of our friends. And on my part, said D'Artagnan, I wish to speak of you, but I find you so completely detached from everything. To love, you cry. Fie! Friends are shadows. The world is a sepulchre. Alas, you will find it so yourself, said Aramis with a sigh. Well, then, let us say no more about it, said D'Artagnan, and let us burn this letter, which, no doubt, announces to you some fresh infidelity of your grisette or your chambermaid. What letter? Cried Aramis, eagerly. A letter which was sent to your abode in your absence, and which was given to me for you. But from whom is that letter? Oh, from some heartbroken waiting woman, some desponding grisette, from Madame de Chevreuse' chambermaid, perhaps, who was obliged to return to Tours with her mistress, and who, in order to appear smart and attractive, stole some perfumed paper and sealed her letter with Duchess's coronet. What do you say? Hold, I must have lost it, said the young man maliciously, pretending to search for it. But fortunately the world is a sepulchre. The men, and consequently the women, are but shadows, and love is a sentiment to which you cry, Fie! Fie! D'Artagnan, cried Aramis, you are killing me. Well, here it is at last, said D'Artagnan, as he drew the letter from his pocket. Aramis made a bound, seized the letter, read it, or rather devoured it, his countenance radiant. This same waiting maid seems to have an agreeable style, said the messenger, carelessly. Thanks, D'Artagnan, thanks, cried Aramis, almost in a state of delirium. She was forced to return to Tours. She is not faithless. She still loves me. Come, my friend, come, let me embrace you. Happiness almost stifles me. The two friends began to dance around the venerable Saint Chrysostom, kicking about famously the sheets of the thesis, which had fallen on the floor. At that moment Bazin entered with the spinach and the omelette. Be off, you wretch, cried Aramis, throwing his skull-cap in his face. Return whence you came. Take back those horrible vegetables, and that poor kickshaw. Order a larded hay, a fat capon, mutton leg dressed with garlic, and 4 bottles of old Burgundy. Bazin, who looked at his master without comprehending the cause of this change, in a melancholy manner, allowed the omelette to slip into the spinach, and the spinach onto the floor. Now this is the moment to consecrate your existence to the King of Kings, said D'Artagnan, if you persist in offering him civility, non inutile desiderium oblation. Go to the devil with your Latin. Let us drink, my dear D'Artagnan, morbleu. Let us drink while the wine is fresh. Let us drink heartily, and while we do so, tell me a little of what is going on in the world yonder.